Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Although I always think he would recuse himself with the second to the last day. There's another, no one is back in. Oh, I don't know. We're not planning to do
Yeah.
Thing here.
I didn't realize how many area.
Oh, it's just because there's a lot of people on the internet.
They can't hear
Everybody's here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Warm. Oh, 29 people in the waiting room. Great second. There's so glad that it didn't have the audience that we had.
If we need here, they got here.
George.
If we want to do like a run, 10 or something. It becomes a problem.
I have never written it down until tonight because. But I'm trusting this to you. And I hope that someday, when the time is right, you will see fit to share it.
I know.
Yeah.
I have to get downstairs right now.
Lots of things are poisonous. Poison is poisonous.
Order, please. This is a special meeting of the Salinas Community Public Utility District. 4 members are present. Director Seaman has recused himself. The first, a couple of housekeeping items. Because of the nature of the room, it's going to be somewhat difficult for the people who are on Zoom to hear. So I would ask everybody to try to keep the room as quiet as possible and to speak as loudly as you can. We are lucky enough to have translators here, so there is going to be the rumor of translation. So we're delighted that they're here and we're going to work with that. Any other housekeeping that you can do?
We have more chairs if we need it.
All right, I think we're probably close to as
It's up to you.
packed as we can be, but if anybody needs a chair, know that is available. We're going to continue on. Item number 3 is community expression. During community expression, we can hear short statements about something that's not on the agenda. And does anybody have any community expressions?
Yeah, Mark Sanchez Correa. I'd like to ask a permission to document the goings on at Share Ranch. To show the community what it looks like, what it feels like, and what it is today. So people can understand what's really happening on the ground today, visually. I talked to some people there at the farm, and if you want to do that, and show what's happening there on an overall basis. Just a short video that we can show for the community. It wouldn't be going out to the world, it would just be for our community. You see the community that is sort of in disguise in our community. And the talking is great, but pictures tell us $1,000 words, right? So I would like permission from the people or land trust and from the community who lives there to do this. That's my office question. That is okay.
Yeah, we cannot take any action on that because it's honest community expression and we wouldn't be the ones who would be offering that permission anyway. But that seems to be something to take it with the owners. Yeah, thank you. Any other community expression items? Hearing none, we will go on to item number 4. Limited water use permit application 410 Cedar Road, Bolinas, Clint Maslerick.
Yes.
Okay. Would you like to describe your project?
We're trying to build a place for my mother-in-law. There's 1 story. Our house is an A-frame and all the bedrooms are on the 2nd floor. What we want to build is a 608 square foot single story unit for her with 1 bath.
And we have a limited water use permit application that you put in. This was brought to our attention at the previous meeting. It was not on as an action item. And so it's on today as an action item. Would you like to speak to that?
Just as a typical, as with the next item, the district would be taking any public comment on the postal permit application to convey to the county. And then the board needs to make a decision with regard to the limited water use permit application.
Is there any discussion about the Cedar Road?
Is there a number attached to the limited water use permit as far as the maximum?
Yeah, basically applying resolution 655, you would be looking at either the average quarterly water use over the past 12 quarters. And that information is in your binders, and the average quarterly water use calculates out to be 1,950 cubic feet per quarter. And under resolution 655, that would then direct you to provision A under resolution 655, which would indicate the 2,700 cubic foot allotment, because it's the greater of that formula under A or B. Under B is the 12-quarter average.
So are you aware of what the limited bodies permit means for your property and your water use? Are you,
I'm barely,
sorry, Barry or?
barely familiar.
Barely, okay. This would limit your water use to 2,700 cubic feet per quarter, which averages out to about 224 gallons a day, is that right? 221, 224? Based on your recent water use, you're sort of hovering around that level, maybe eclipsing it slightly, so when you're adding the ADU, you may, naturally see an increase in water use, but you may need to make some adjustments to get in that threshold, so the DPUD is happy to look at you to help you get under that number and stay there.
Great, thank you.
On this item.
I make a motion to approve the limited bodies permit, that's 2,700 cubic feet per quarter.
I would second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Good luck with your project.
Thank you.
Nice. Moving on to item 5A. Coastal permit application for the vacant lot at 130 Mesa Road, Salinas. BCLT to establish a temporary private RV trailer campground in a new on-site wastewater system. The purpose of dividing this item into two parts is that historically, one of the services that the BCPUD has provided to the community is to provide a local forum for public comment on project permit applications, rather than everyone having to drive in the hill. So item 5A is specifically public comment on this project. I would want to let people know that we are not going to be transcribing everything you say in perfect detail and conveying that perfectly to the county. If you would like to have your comments word for word the way you want them, then I suggest a letter to the county would be a more appropriate way to do that if you want to make sure that your thoughts are memorialized. What we're doing is providing a place for people's comment. We will offer those comments generally over to the council. And we'll do it as carefully as possible, but I don't want to set unrealistic expectations without perfect stenography. Because this is such a large meeting, we've asked on the agenda, we're asking for people to limit their comments to 3 minutes. We will be keeping time. And we want to make sure that everybody who wants to speak within a reasonable amount gets to speak. We also have a lot of people on Zoom will be calling on as well. I'm wondering if any BCLT would like to make a brief statement. You do not have to limit yourself to 3 minutes, but if you'd like to just describe the project outline briefly so that people can know what they're. I can't see. For Sean.
I would welcome that opportunity, and I just want to say thank you to the translators who are here, and I know that it's creating a little bit of noise for some of us who aren't used to that, and I just want us all to be sensitive to the fact that it's important to have that going on and to try to not, give looks like, why are they whispering over there? So thanks, translators. So there's been a lot of public discourse about this project, and I think folks who haven't yet had a chance to read about it in any of our local publications can also now do so on our website. So I'll just be brief and know that there's more resources if you want the details, okay? We are in the final stages of purchasing the 46 acres that remain of the historic Tashara Ranch, which has been in our community, providing local food and agricultural products for consumption for 100 years. It's a working family farm. And the Tashara family is ready to see it to its next phase. And there is a receiver, Larry Baskin, who is in charge of that process. So BCLP is in negotiation with the receiver to purchase the final 46 acres of the ranch. We had previously purchased 20 acres, the portion that you see from Main Road, the grazing pasture, and the area where the chicken yard is. I think that we're all also now aware that nearly 60 members of our community live there. Some of them have lived there for 2 decades or more. And we have an opportunity to help them also come into a new relationship in our community as well. So the county was alerted to health and safety issues on the property. They declared an emergency, a health safety emergency, and moved forward to stabilize the situation with the need for emergency housing. So the BCLP has really been following the county lead on this, and I think it's important to clarify that for folks who may not be aware. So Sean Pennings is our planning consultant. He may at some point in this meeting speak up to correct me. You should do that because I am not an expert, and thankfully I don't have to be because we have a consultant who is an expert in the writing process. Was hired by the county to pursue this with the BCLT as the applicant of record. So this is a 4-phase project. The first phase is the emergency housing, and that's what we're really here to talk about today, right? That's all that the coastal permit pertains to, and the water permit is, the limited water use permit is a subset of that coastal permit. The commission requires that. But I think it's important to just give a really quick overview of the other phases of the project because there's been a lot of confusion and some misinformation, and I can really reassure people that what we're talking about is temporary emergency housing is temporary. It will be for the current residents, Tashara families who live on the Tashara Ranch. It will exist only until we have permanent affordable housing completed, and that permanent affordable housing goes through a traditional coastal planning process with all of the appeals and all the hearings and everything that we are more familiar with and come to expect. And then the temporary housing goes away. It doesn't stay, it's not there to serve anyone else, only, exists to house the current residents, what was seen as the ranch, the health and code violations, we do the remediation work, move everyone back into permanent housing where they already live now, and the temporary house goes away. As part of that creation of the permanent affordable housing, we also in parallel will be creating an agricultural cooperative. And this is something that several members of our community who are interested in already doing agricultural use can participate in. We are not starting that now because we're trying to deal with the emergency, which I know some question if it's a national emergency. I just viewed from meeting some of the residents, and all I can tell you is in my bones, it's number 18. So that's what I'm interested in. I think that it's important that we answer before too long what that agricultural co-op looks like, if we get to December and how that works. And I think that's also a process that the community can be part of. But I want to be really clear that that will not be a community-led process. That will be a process led by the members of the agricultural cooperative who are agricultural producers in the community today. They may employ people to live on the ranch, and they employ people who do not live on the ranch, but that's something that will be decided down the line. And the final phase of the project that I also want to mention is wetland restoration, because what many people I don't think realize until we started talking about this project, like that cow pasture, where we see the cows, that is a wetland, and it is possible, parts of it are, and it is possible that the cow pasture can actually be fantastic wetland habitat that exists, all over West Marin. So what we hope is this can actually be a demonstration project. It's really a model of how to rehabilitate wetlands in the world of West Marin, working with MALT, working with Coast Conservancy, and other partners. There's really a lot that we can do. We're excited to have that as part of it, but again, putting that a little bit later, beyond the emergency. So I'll leave it there for now, and thank you for the time. Thank you very much.
All right. At this time, we will encourage and we listen to public comment. As I said, this is the county, the best form we can. If you want it perfect for yourself, we can give you the address. And I will be timing, I guess. So there we go. Please try to, there are a lot of people I think who want to speak, please try to be brief. And if you're saying, I agree with so-and-so, you might want to just. That can be time consuming. All right. Sean, do you have anything you want to add?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Sean Kennings. I'm a land use planning consultant. I often work with the land trust. Some of you may know me in town. I've helped private individuals as well. By Marin County for this specific process for the emergency permit only. And I think it's important to note, and Annie said this earlier, the county has declared an emergency situation. So we are working towards what the county requires when it comes to permitting for an emergency situation. This project that we're talking about today is solely to provide an acceptable and appropriate living situation for these individuals in the temporary time period. It's not permanent housing. It's not a permanent project. It's permanent improvements. There is a septic system, but the intent of the trailer project is to house these individuals in a place that is appropriate on the land trust property. There is much project information on the county website. I'd be happy to have a conversation with people offline. I don't want to get into the specifics, but we have prepared an application that meets the county's requirements, and the county is the one processing this project, has the review and approval authority. One other thing I wanted to point out to what Andy said about the phase 4, the sort of wetland restoration. The idea for that, the genesis for that wetland restoration was to help the BCPUD with their spray fields that get inundated with storm flows in the wintertime. And so the idea was we could create a public benefit, a public restoration of a wetland, not a true wetland there today, but create something, create a new facility that would retain and detain water, provide refuge for wildlife. But that was the intent of that, was to help the BCPUD. That project obviously is long down the road. We haven't investigated it any further than just the. So that's, I mean, I'm available for questions if anyone has any specifics, but I know there's a lot of people here who want to comment, but I just wanted to say that this is a county initiated project that we are trying to facilitate housing individuals who are living in really sort of egregious conditions.
All right, I'll open it up for comment. Hi, I'm Molly. Hi.
Hi, Gabriella, just give me a way to slow down if I need to, and try to shorten this up as much as possible. Can you give me a warning at like 1 minute just to see where I'm at?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, to stand up? Okay.
I just have to shake. See that.
Okay. Oh, I don't know if I can do this, make me too nervous. You're a teacher. Okay. Hostile high school students, I can do. Okay, thank you to the board. I am in full support of a solution to the ongoing housing problem at the Teixeira Ranch. The residents of this ranch are our friends, our children's classmates, and cherished members of our community. They are also human beings who deserve the common decency that safe housing provides. The time for a solution is now. It's beyond time. Unfortunately, I am not confident that the current project presented by the BCLT will meet the needs of these residents. I fear that the accumulated cost of this enormous undertaking will eventually lead to monthly rents beyond reach, resulting in housing that is not, in fact, affordable. I remain open to be convinced otherwise, but until then, my hope is that we might work together as a community to find a better solution to meet the Teixeira's immediate and future needs. Tonight, we are discussing our town's water scarcity and whether or not the BPUD can assure the amount of water necessary for the Teixeira project proposal. The decision made tonight will determine the feasibility of this project, but it will also have enormous ramifications for all future decisions that the BPUD makes regarding water use in Bolinas. I'm eager to hear how the interpretations of current BPUD formulas could assure the requested water amount and uphold the water moratorium. My hope is that it's possible, but my research indicates that it is not. Okay, Gabrielle, I might have to hurry up. The essential and resounding question that must be resolved is how can the current BPUD boards assure a daily water usage of approximately 740 gallons a day for the current Teixeira project, when in 2000, before the drought and predictions of mega droughts, the BPUD could not assure this 1,280 gallons a day. This is close to 500 gallons more than what was denied over 20 years ago. What changed? Please convince me with evidence how this can work. I'm truly eager for some possibility that I might have missed because everything I see is a contradiction. If the BPUD assures this amount for the Teixeira project, they will struggle to be able to enforce their own rules. This threatens the water moratorium. Additionally, if assured, the Teixeira Ranch water meter will be the most vulnerable water meter in Bolinas because it will have been stretched well beyond its limit. Stringent daily water rationing will be required of the Teixeira residents, and without the built-in cushion to weather times of conservation, the Teixeira residents will be exposed to unnecessary hardship during times of drought. This is a cruel perpetuation of their current suffering and completely unacceptable. We can do better, and we need to do better. Let's lower the temperature, press pause, and come together as a community to solve this problem. The Teixeira residents deserve a feasible and livable solution that will keep them safe and secure into the future. They deserve this respect. In the meantime, and I'm almost finished. In the meantime, I urge community members to contact the county to demand immediate action. While this crisis has gone ignored by code enforcement for decades, the recent coastal planning emergency permit elevates the resources available and expedites the timeline. This has officially been declared an emergency, and with that comes rights and responsibilities. Would hurricane victims be expected to reside in rubble while plans are sorted out? No. The emergency gets stabilized. HHS, Health and Human Resources, purchased a fleet of 20 RVs during the pandemic for precisely this kind of situation. The rescue fleet is ready. Bolinas, we are passionate, we are resourceful, and we are unstoppable when we work together as a team. Our friends, neighbors, and loved ones at the Teixeira Ranch should not be exposed to these deplorable conditions for 1 second longer. Enough is enough. Demand action now. Thank you.
I'll be brief. I would just like to say, we support these families wholeheartedly, and I'll speak not for my wife and myself, maybe just myself. I think my wife supports me in this, but best for me to speak up from my heart here. I support this plan as it exists. I think we need to do it. We need to do it quickly. These are amazing people I've known for a long time. They're amazing parts of our community, and they should get all of our support as quickly as possible. Gracias por su tiempo.
All right, my name is Layla Monroe. I am the neighbor on the north end of the project, Gaspers Lane. I also have friends and staff members who live on the Share property. I have been involved in the effort to find a solution to this problem for 4 years. So the land trust purchased the lot closest to where we're standing today 4 years ago. And as you all know, a portion of that field is designated a wetland, a portion along the edges. That project worked. Jenny, you were there at many of the meetings. We tried to find a solution through that process. Things have moved forward. We had 2 extremely wet winters. There was a health crisis that has emerged, landing children and others in the hospital. The crisis that we know today, the best solution that we have is the one that is currently presented. As Matt said, this is the solution. And I just want to quickly run through a couple of things that I feel like have been bandied about as the issues that should undermine this project. One, yes, there are wetlands on the property. The project is not within the wetlands. The trailers are not within the wetlands. The septic system meets the 100-foot setback from the wetlands. The project is not within the wetlands. There are wetlands that have been negatively impacted for decades by the current operations. Those wetlands will be significantly improved by the cleanup of the toxic dump that is on the north end of the project. Feel free to walk the roads and take a look. Decades of toxic waste has been discarded there, and it leaches into the waterways. All of that trash, all of that will have to be addressed and remediated as part of the land trust project. No other owner is going to want to take on that effort. It is a massive liability, and only an entity like the land trust can bear, and the county, with the county's backing too. The project will not break the water moratorium. I know that I'm not on the BCPUD, and so I speak a bit out of turn here, but having read Resolution 173, which establishes the moratorium, it prohibits new and additional meters. It does not prohibit the use or the evaluation of existing water meters, which is what we're looking at. Resolution 655, which was passed in 2019, and I think Don will probably speak more to this as a former board member when it was passed, but that provides a formula for how to calculate whether or not there is the appropriate amount of water being used by a meter. These are existing meters. During the drought, there was not an issue despite that the entire town was under drought conditions. These meters, this is pre-existing. So I really think we need to put those 2 pieces to bed. And if you care about the people, then please help us move this emergency project forward. Thank you.
Then we'll call some people from the Zoom.
My name is Mickey Murch, and I grow food for the community and sell it 24 hours at a farm stand. It's my ultimate pleasure every day to farm with Andres, who lives at this property. And so supporting this project is supporting local food. And we farm on the Teixeira Ranch, the far end of it. If you see some greenhouses, I've been helping the other young farmers that open that ground for the last 10 years. And now I get to farm that with Andres and some other folks that also live at the Teixeira Ranch. And so we're really excited to have BCLT be our landlord. in a previous rendition of this plan, we were gonna have to incorporate someone's house that was gonna be right in the middle of my field. And it was like, sure, I'll do it. I want to have that ground. We'll put the mansion right there. And I'm really glad that's not happening. This is way better planned, what's happening now, that we're not to farm around someone's land. And I just think that the support that we're all feeling in this room is really important, and that eventually we're gonna have a much more resilient food system with the agricultural co-op and secure housing for our farm workers and food producers. So I just really hope that this project goes through and that we get good support.
Thank you. Emery?
You're mute.
You gotta mute, unmute. We still can't hear you.
She has to do it herself.
Volume up on the speaker.
Yeah. You heard Sean.
Yeah.
We can't hear you, Emery.
She might need to unmute on her end.
Sorry, yeah, it's not working.
And we'll come back to you.
Maybe she could call her. Alicia.
Alicia?
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. I just wanted to echo, the first speaker, I didn't catch her name, and so one, I would just ask that one, all of your faces are very small on the camera, so I'll ask you if you could just identify yourself when you speak. That would be very helpful for me. But I second the comments of the first person who spoke, and without repeating further what I think are very legitimate water moratorium issues, I want to say that anyone who purchases property will have the legal obligation to remediate. That's something that follows the land. And so the idea that there's only one owner who will ever remediate, that's simply not factual. However, I want to just raise, I'm an attorney. I've served, in one circumstance, I was serving on a board here in San Francisco. And there was a group that came to us because they wanted our endorsement, because it was a group of people who now live in Bayview, had been historically displaced from the Western Addition. And they came to the board that I was on seeking of support because they were seeking to have priority to get affordable housing in their current neighborhoods. And they were individuals who had a history of displacement from within the city. And we were presented with lots of information and lots of history. And as a board, we determined, as a matter of law, you can't prioritize when it comes to housing. So one of the things that I am very concerned about with this project is that the individuals who are currently who currently need dignified housing and who have needed it for 20 years are not going to be the ultimate beneficiaries of it. One, because it'll be too expensive. Two, because you can't prioritize in that way. And, if you have a list, you have to do it fairly. You can't, if you just think about it in terms of US housing history and segregation, if you prioritize people from the neighborhood and you had all white neighborhoods, you end up with all white neighborhoods, and that was deemed illegal. You can't do it. It's unconstitutional. It's housing discrimination. So I am just super concerned that the people who are being identified and spoken of as being the motivating reason for this project, that they're not going to be the people who ultimately benefit from it. So that is a fundamental concern that I have. I'm very concerned that all of this is being done in a rushed manner, and that the thoughtful process that was going on for the project that the person spoke about a minute ago, that thoughtful planning that ultimately was determined to not be possible, is not going to happen here because of the rush and the emergency. I spoke earlier today to Larry Baskin, who is the receiver. He informed me that the individual, the girl who was made ill or who was ill, that she became ill after the county inspection process occurred, that the illness was not related to the housing and that that family has since left. I don't know, maybe he is not speaking accurately. I don't know, but he basically dispelled the notion that anyone has been made actually ill in this immediate circumstance. So,
That's, you're up to 4 minutes now.
I'm at 4 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, and I'll leave it at that. I just am concerned that procedures aren't being followed, that legitimate concerns that normally would have a place for process are not being, that this procedure and this manner is not giving them the proper course.
Thank you so much. Ken.
Thank you. My name is Kent Katikian. First, I have a general comment, which is that if the board, and let me be clear that in the 5 or 6 days since this application was submitted, I'm not very quick. So I haven't really had time to decide whether I'm for or against this proposal. That's easy to do in 6 days. Let me say a few things. First, if the board is going to approve this project, or some of the things as Carly asked for, I think you first have to reach a decision on a very general question, which is, do the facts of this project, are they inconsistent with the facts on which Judge Hodges' 1991 decision I don't know if you've had an opportunity to review that 53-page decision with your counsel in the last 6 days. I'm not sure I would have had the time to do it had I known this was going on earlier. But if you don't do that, you're running a terrible risk of establishing facts that are in fact counterfactual to the extensive finding fact of Judge Hodges. I want to remind you that he had ordered that an expert in water resources be determine what the facts were in the BCPUD case to determine whether the water supply was both fragile and limited. And after reviewing the experts' report, Judge Hodges concluded that yes, in fact, the facts do support the conclusion that the water supply was better than limited, and that the decision by the board was not arbitrary and capricious. It's important to understand that the issue here is not violating the moratorium, the resolutions of the moratorium. The issue, the real deep issue, is if this happens, can someone like Pacific Legal Foundation come along later and challenge the moratorium, challenge the decision to establish those resolutions, and have it set aside? We'll all be caught up in another 10, 15 year litigation. And in the future, we might not be as lucky as we were the last time when the venue of the case was changed from Sacramento County to a county that was friendlier to the values of this community, which is what happened in that case. Secondly,
Almost the 3 minutes.
thank you. Secondly, if you're going to do staffing, by your own regulations, you must take into account all relevant factors. I suggest the relevant factor in this case is I can't figure out what the number of people are that are involved in this that back in 2021, it was 53. In March of this year, it was 59. In May, and the application was, I don't know what it is, but probably maybe the usage has increased, and therefore the average increased, because in the face of this emergency, the number of people on the property have continued to increase. Secondly, if you stack according to the staff's report, you must find that the sole purpose is affordable housing. In order to ensure that the sole project, the purpose of this project was affordable housing, you establish that very clearly. You really have to require as a condition before whatever you do is affected, that there is a reported deed restriction on the use that that clearly ties down what the purpose is. That's meaningful, that draws clear lines that someone 10 years from now can enforce. And the last thing is that I'm not sure you can do this because by your own rules, your service connection has to be surveyed. Property that's all owned by the project. Components. In this case, as I understand it, again, but we have how much time to look at this. You've got 130 Mesa Road, 160 Mesa Road. One of those properties will continue to be owned by the shares and be served by this stacked meter, and the other property owned by BCLT and also served by the same stacked meter. So you may not be able to do it because of this resolution. Please be careful.
Just to be clear, we'll be talking more about water in the next section of this meeting. This is mostly revolving around comments that we will transmit to the county regarding this project. So we'll be discussing water in more depth very soon.
Thank you, guys. My name is David Kimball. I've been a resident here 34 years. My wife served 9 years on this board. I served 14. I'm going to remind us that, as Kevin said, my comments are focused on this agenda item, hoping that if I need to speak up to the next agenda item, I may have an opportunity. I want to remind us, this is the town that fought to save itself. We didn't look at horrible odds and turn our backs. I read every document that was attached to the agenda for tonight's meeting. The letters, permit, the approval of the permit, and so forth. Knowing the community, there isn't another place that this problem can be relieved from a social justice point of view. This community has huge resources in goodwill, in financial resources. We are the town that fought to save ourselves. Let's not let our fears fill the empty vessel. Let's let our fantasies and our hopes for the future and our hopes for the people that live, the Latinas and Latinos that live on the property. That's my plea, that we keep an open mind and we remember that we are the town that fought to save ourselves. Thank you.
I'll just add to your eloquent message. My name's Linda Mornell. I've lived in Bolinas almost 55 years. And I, just like COVID, we became a national recognition for the community that we are and can be. I just want to say I've never been prouder of this community. I've never been prouder to live here. I've never been prouder to welcome the diversity and the agriculture and the innovating things that we have and your efforts and Annie, and we support the BCLT. I'm just thrilled with what's happening, and I want to say thank you.
Hi, my name is Leo Castelman. Was principal of the school for a while, back in the aughts. And one thing I can tell you about schools is you need families to make an interesting places. And this is a project that has been long time needed, also a long time coming. And they're really smart people who've been working on it for a really long time. And I have every reason to trust them and think it's a great idea. This should move forward. What I mainly wanted to offer, though, was something called the Simple Sabotage Field Manual. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's put out by the SS, by the precursor to the CIA in 1944. It was designed to help citizens in occupied countries slow things down. It's a sabotage meeting. They called for something called purposeful stupidity. And here's some of the strategies that I heard actually implemented by some commenters tonight, straight from a CIA manual in 1944. Insist on doing everything through channels, never permit shortcuts to be taken in order to expedite decisions. Make speeches, talk as frequently as possible and at great length, illustrate your points by long anecdotes and accounts of personal experience. When possible, refer all matters to committees for further study and consideration. Attempt to make the committee as large as possible, never less than 5. Bring up irrelevant issues as frequently as possible. Haggle over precise wordings of communications, of minutes, of resolutions. Refer back to matters decided upon at the last meeting and attempt to reopen the question of the advisability of that decision. Advocate caution. Be reasonable and urge your fellow conferees to be reasonable and avoid haste, which might result in embarrassments or difficulties later on. So I would just say that consciously or not, in my humble observation, opponents of this project are purposefully engaging in sabotage.
I see some hands in the room. I'm gonna go back to the Zoom for a moment. And Bree, do you want to try it again? And Shushu, do you want?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to really, what was just said is kind of where I was going with this, is that I feel like, and with all due respect, and I understand that the people that have spoken that have their reservations about it, we're beyond having those reservations. We should all be ashamed at what these people have been living in. We should just be absolutely ashamed. And the fact that we haven't already done this is now we can do that. But you no longer get to say that you are for affordable housing or that you want these people to have a place to live and also simultaneously acknowledge how terrible it is and say that you want to wait on this. They're mutually exclusive. You cannot any longer claim that you want this to work, but you just want some. We don't have more time. We're beyond time. It's way, way beyond time. And we need to support these people in our community. These are our friends, our family members, your children's friends. I've seen these conditions and you would not let your families live in them. I can tell you that with 100% certainty. So if you are going to say that you support and you love these people, you cannot ask for more time on this. You need to go with the project that they already have in place, that they already have a plan for, unless you have a better plan. This is where we're at with it. We don't have more time. We need to do what this proposal is, and we need to do it right now. And if you want to continue to say that you support these people, then you will be for it. You don't get to say that anymore if you're going to try and block this. You just don't. And these are human beings. These are members of our community, and we need to stand up and show them that we are going to make this right. That's our only option here if we want to keep our souls intact. That's our only option. And that's all I have.
Peter Smith. David, thank you for talking about the time I fought the saber. I was here when we fought the saber itself. There's only a couple of faces in the room that were there then. And I'm a building contractor in this community, and I've built a lot of buildings and done a lot of work. And without the people that live on that property, I have no business. Your gardens, all the work that's done, the Garcia boys, they're all help us in every way we can. I'm also the captain of the Williams Volunteer Fire Department. And I have to have all your trust all the time if I come into your house, that you can tell me your secrets so that I can do what I need to do to help you. So I won't talk about specifics, but we go in there sometimes on medical emergencies and it's hidden. It's really sad to see what we see there, and it needs to change. The people are living under conditions they should not be living. As a building contractor, over the years, I'm sad to say, I have taken hazardous materials and dumped them in the Sheriff Duncan. Because he will take just about anything. And he has over the years. If we have enough money to spend, he'll take it. So that needs to be cleaned up and remediated. It's just a horrible mess up. So I support this thing 100%. Thank you.
Did I see her?
I'm Mark Butler. And real quick. It hits my heart, but we have two communities in this community right now. We have two communities. And my hope and my dream for this is that this will become one community. We have a chance to reach, invite, help, learn, meet the people that have been living at the Teixeira Ranch. And I have friends there and I know what the conditions are, and they're not good conditions. So I just want to say this. I think it's an opportunity for us to form one larger community.
Yeah, Jan Springer. The first thing I want to say is that I'm sorry to this community that it's taken this long for all of us to come on your back. And now that we know, and I don't think we're going anywhere, we're gonna fight for you to get these conditions like we would want for our own kids. And I'm sorry that you chose to do this. And it's gonna be good moving forward. It's gonna happen for you guys. We love you. Anybody in Zoom?
My name is Jeff Manson, and I just want to say I've been really looking at this project with interest for months, and longer, maybe years now, and I am in full support of it going forward. I think it is, as Emery put it, beyond time to act, and for our fellow community members here. And I think also because it's going to be a long project, there are lots of opportunities to support that in the way that makes it the most equitable for people that need it the most, aka the folks that have been living at the Teixeira Ranch, and make sure that we maintain, our modern work format. It's all the issues that are brought up. There's time for looking at that. There's time to think about it. And so though this feels rushed, it is rushed because where action is required. The long game is one in which we can really come together. And I want to echo Mark's sentiments that hopefully this is an opportunity for our various communities to work together, to become closer, become friends, and become a community. So I just want to say I'm totally in support of the plan as it stands. And want to help. And the one other thing I say is I've spent a lot of time living in a situation in which I'm interested in saving water myself, and we're really into water catchment and different techniques I won't get into now, but I know I see a few different faces in this community that know about water conservation, and if that's because we're at the public facilities meeting, if water conservation is something that is a concern, it should be a concern to all of us. As we put into the place with a wealth of knowledge around how to live on the land, like sustainably, and in conditions that are good and comfortable.
As long as we are watering ornamental gardens, taking hot dogs, enjoying other extravagance, can we simply discuss water scarcity while men, women, and children in this community are living in improper living conditions? How can you want to protect something that you have, knowing that it will leave people in unsafe condition. In a small town where you know these people. I trust the BCPUD, their incredible staffing board, and the BCLT's incredible staffing boards to make sure that they're protecting the water moratorium while also finding a way to be better and do better as a community. If we can't open our minds and hearts in this moment for something so virtuous, it's a shame. We are shameful. We are not the community we think we are.
Yeah.
Deep breath in. Hi, my name is Lucy Reed. I've lived here about 24 years. I'm a newcomer. I hadn't been on this particular property for maybe 15 years, and I was shocked 15 years ago at the conditions, and I understand that. So I think that getting RVs nearby on the property so the community stay together during the long process of getting the housing, permanent housing is fantastic. All these people who are in all these relationships who are part of our community, get to stay in our community, get to stay together, get to maintain your family relationships, get to be with all to share property while this is happening. It's unbelievably brilliant, and I support it.
Other comments?
I just want to ask one question because one of the speakers, I'm Lyndon Comstock. One of the speakers brought up a point that I was concerned about, and I wanted to get the BCLT folks to respond. The speaker said the people who are living there now will not be able to stay. That shocked me, and I want to see if you could respond to that.
Thank you for that opportunity. I think that, you know, Alicia spoke to fair housing laws as they exist on the laws, and I think that is an accurate reflection of fair housing. What I can tell you is, and certainly the BCLT is held to that, you know, when we place people from our wait list, the way we go through traditional, you know, processes, we absolutely are, and we will be in this case. What's unique here is that the county and the BCLT share the goal of zero displacement for this population. It serves no one, the county, nor the BCLT, nor the residents, if they are displaced. It creates, you know, another issue and a downstream issue that I'm sure everyone can imagine, right? So just from that perspective alone, it would make sense that the county would share the goal with the BCLT for zero displacement. And therefore, we will design the project in a way that supports zero displacement. This is a project we are working on with and for current residents of the Tashira Ranch.
Yeah.
Is it, can I make just one comment? If you're talking about a government entity building bespoke housing for a defined population, I think you're talking about a fair housing violation. I simply want to say, if this hasn't been actually analyzed, you're going to have there's going to be a problem. And so,
I appreciate the chance that you're taking to reiterate the concern that you've already made. I would like to ask Sean Kennings, who was on the call. Was it Sean or was it you, Jeff? Maybe Sean. Yeah, Sean, I would like to see if you can reiterate your understanding of the county's goal in this regard.
So my understanding for any new housing projects, hi, sorry, I'm back. Any new housing project, whether it's by a developer, by a private property owner, or in this case, the land trust, Marin County, you have to replace the units that are removed, even if they are, quote unquote, you know, not designated units, not deed restricted units. So therefore, any project that would go forward would have to replace those units. Now, I don't know how the BCLT structures their, who gets housing and where, but I do believe, Alicia, I think you're speaking to types of projects when you are a fully funded by the federal government or state housing laws, and you're getting funding and grants from those facilities to build your project, then yes, you have to open it up to specific groups. You can't just say, this is for this community. For instance, I worked on the Victory Village project in Fairfax. That was sponsored by Eden Housing. They had grants from the state. They had to open it up to people outside the community. If you're not taking a fully funded 100% affordable project from grant money from wherever it may be, then you don't have to have it specific to, a fair housing practice. So the land trust, if my understanding again, Annie, is money from different sources, some of it comes from the county. So the land trust has its own process.
Yeah, I think, Sean, you're breaking up a little bit, so I'd like, if it's okay, to invite Jed to butchering your last name, I'm so sorry. I'd like to allow Jed to speak on behalf of the BCLT. And I also just want to say, before I turn it over, Alicia, you have considerable knowledge and expertise that you've demonstrated at every step of the way as voiced concern about this project. And I welcome you to join us in making this project the best project it can be. It can share the goals that I just stated, rather than looking for ways to.
I object to your suggesting, I'm sorry, I object to your suggesting that I'm looking for ways to undermine. What I am asking for BCLT is to be accountable for its claim that it can rehouse these identical people, even though, how can a government entity promise specific individuals one-to-one replacement when there's a desperate housing shortage across? And so that's all I'm saying.
Alicia, thank you so much for your viewpoint. My name is Jeff Provenel. I grew up in Bolinas. I was raised by Sally and Greg Peacock. I'm an attorney who practices solely in affordable housing with a California specific and nationwide practice with a law firm based out of Washington, D.C. and Boston. While it is true what Alicia says, that there are a variety of restrictions and considerations around fair housing that need to be considered in the development of any project as it moves forwards. Those restrictions are connected with the funding sources and the various requirements and regulations related to the development of that property. And the BCLT is committed to working with the county and community partners to structure the project as it moves forward over the next years, to identify sources and avenues and preferences that will allow for as little and, if possible, no displacement to the existing community.
And I just want to add, this is the most difficult, the most expensive way to do this. So when I say that we're committed to this, it is a commitment that comes with material sacrifice, if you will, because it is the right thing to do. So I resent the notion that BCLT would be misleading the community or misleading the residents about how real we believe our ability is to fit to something that has not yet been determined. So I cannot provide you the exact specific answer at this point in time of exactly how it will happen for all the reasons. Yes. Just thank you.
I see 4 and raise your hand still. No, I'm raised. Okay. I see Cheryl, Jenny, and Howard. Cheryl.
Oh, am I back? No? Oh.
It's me, Emery.
Emery has spoken already. We're taking.
Yeah, this is Cheryl Ruggiero. I think there are two different things that are being discussed here, and they're getting a little bit confused. To the county, this project is represented as an agricultural worker housing project. To the community, it is being represented as an affordable housing project. These are two different issues with two different sets of laws that are mandated for each one. And unfortunately, the community, the BCLT cannot legally meet the requirements of either one, which is why this plan failed in 2000. And we're now 23 years later, revamping a project that the BPUD rejected 23 years ago for insufficient water assurance. And I'm shameful. I think it is shameful that these conditions have existed for 23 years or more, but decisions based on our precious resources should not be based on emotions. They should be based on the law, because if any one of you have an issue in the future, you are not going to want those decisions based on someone's emotions. You will want the law to be followed. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Jenny Piper, quite a few, 40 years. I have to say one thing quickly first. I find it very difficult to be dealing with people that I admire and love as my community members, and have some comments made that seem to represent the fact that those people have concerns for the individuals who live there and the future for them, whether they will in fact have water available and whether they will in fact be able to afford the homes at the end of this project, which is going to have a great deal of cost. That somehow those concerns for them in the future mean that we don't have concern for them now. I think that people in this room are here because they care. I care about these people and have concern. I also have concern based on the fact that this has been going on so long that it may not be possible to provide 60 people with the water they need and the affordability they need. And we have to not promise things that we can't see for them in the future. I also know that if this is an emergency, and it seems to be an emergency, we have the wherewithal in our community to take care of it now and not wait till September, for heaven's sake. If it's an emergency, we have to take care of them. It means that it is an emergency and there needs to be help. And I don't know who takes care of that. I don't know who's responsible for it. But if we sit here and say we're for a project, that means that people are just in their same circumstance until September and maybe longer. We don't know. And 2 years before something else happens, maybe longer. We really have to do something now. And I haven't heard anything that says somebody needs to step up and do something. However, we have to provide for the people who are living there, and that's all the people living there, they just share in their homes and their brands. We need to step up and do it and not make people feel bad because we're not clapping loud enough for one or another. We're all here because we care. So please try not to make me feel bad
because I care enough to worry about these people down the line. It's been 20 years, we haven't been able to make something happen. So we gotta make something happen. That's not gonna take another 20 years and doesn't hold.
Oh, yeah, I just want to restate something that Hector and his daughter said at the town meeting, which was a plea to not use our better education and access to resources to oppose this scheme. Clearly, many intelligent people have expressed opposition, not necessarily tonight, not necessarily this thing, but around this issue, there has been some opposition. In my mind, it's not fully informed. I want to reiterate the phase 4, which I love, off in the distance, creating a permanent wetland, helping the BCPUD dispose of storm water that otherwise would go onto the sewer pond lands and then be a big storage Creek. Create an agriculture co-op. The people of the BCPUD, the people of the land trust, of whom I am one, have good hearts, and I have not seen any indication anywhere that anybody is trying to break the moratorium or do anything underhand or dishonest or not. The people we're talking about here are the people who work our gardens, clean our houses, who run our restaurants. This town has turned a blind eye to this situation for far too long. The county is now, the instigator of this emergency. It wasn't the land trust, it wasn't anybody in town. Let's get on with it. If you're concerned about the issue, get on with it. Thank you.
It's bedtime, so I just want to speak up before we go to bed. And I know you're sending this off with the county, and I've gone over the hill many times. And in the past, we talk about affordable housing at the county, and I think it's always one of those things where bodies are counted, comments are counted, letters are counted for and against whatever project is going on. And I want to make sure that all of us who showed up tonight here and on Zoom are counted for myself, that I am in support of this project. I wasn't here. I haven't been here that long, 12 years. I've read the book, to Town the Budget Save Itself many times. I've loaned it out to people, and I love to refer to it as something that's really brilliant. And there's something in that always sits hard with me. And that is when they made the moratorium, they thought about the future, and they were concerned that they might be creating an exclusive community somewhere down the line. And I say, like, that's where we've come. And we have this moment to actually do that. And I know that there's this crazy traffic that comes from Petaluma North into this town every day because people can't afford to live here, but they have to work here. And now we have this opportunity for people to have this living here and working here. And I want that to happen, and I want my body and my soul to be counted in whatever goes to the county. And I want also everyone to support the people who are here now. So thank you.
An answer to your question?
I just wanted to, I heard a couple comments that were posed as comments, not questions, but there was a question in them. So I just want to speak to two things. I heard someone point to HHS as the county entity that is responsible for ensuring the health and safety and doing work for the residents now. And that is true, but I want it to be known that HHS is doing everything that they can, and what they are doing in compliance with the request of the residents. Now, if we want them to do more, what we need you to do is write to Dennis Rodoni and ask for his support for HHS to be able to do more than they are currently permitted to do. There are many parts of the house. It gets complicated, I'm not gonna get into the details, but please do not pile on HHS. Please go to Rodoni and ask him if you care that HHS be allowed to. The second thing is that I wanted to speak to the affordability. Well, actually, how do you speak to affordability?
So just, there's been some discussion about how you retain the affordability of housing. When your development costs exceed the amount that you are able to charge for rent. This is by definition what affordable housing is. Affordable housing is rent restricted housing. Typically less than 80% of AMI, area median income, which in Marin County is very high. You're typically looking at between 80 and 30% of AMI. And in order to allow for such housing to exist, you need to subsidize the project. These are the subsidies, and this is the funding stack that the BCLT will be looking to put together during this interim period. While the temporary housing is in place, it will take time. It will come with restrictions that come over, and it will come from a variety of sources, be it federal, state, local, or private donors. But this is how you create a project that is sustainable and affordable to the residents of the community, based on making that gap between the rent that the residents are able to pay and the development cost of a project that will far exceed the cost that those residents are able to pay for in their rent, because they are by definition low income.
And when we say the BCLT, I heard somebody recently ask me, are you the only one doing all this? I just want to be really clear. My ego is not that big. I am the first to admit what I am not good at. There are a lot of things. So no, I am not the only one doing this. Say BCLT gets shorthand for, hires to come, partners to come, all of which we'll be talking about. This is not a one-woman show. We're already 15. It's certainly not going to be a one-woman show to get all done that Jed just described.
Ladies and gentlemen. I feel, and when you had a chance, I would like to move on to item B5B, unless we've got something burning. And Emery, I can't hear you. So you can make.
I mean, it's burning a little bit. It's pretty short. I just.
2 minutes,
Okay, I feel like what Alicia was touching on was exactly what Howard was touching on, which is exactly what Estella and Hector touched on, which is to take those laws that were made because of segregation and because people were not getting correct housing, to take them now and try and use them against a situation where it's the very same people those laws were made to protect is despicable. It's despicable. So, and I'll leave that at that. And it is emotional because these are human beings. So to take that, it's the worst kind of gaslighting, to take those laws that were made to protect people just like these and try and use it against this project. I find it's just kind of gross. It's yucky. And that's all I have to say. I'm done.
If I would like to just speak to that for 1 second.
Yes.
If that's what you heard me say, I'm sorry that I was not able to communicate. I think that what I'm trying to describe is the reality of the laws that apply. That's all. I mean, one way or the other. It's just the reality.
Cheryl, would you like your last 2 minutes?
Yes, thank you. I think facts here are really important. And the fact is that the county was not the instigator of this emergency. Larry Baskin sent an email to the county asking the county to come and inspect. And this was what created the quote emergency of 23 years. And it is shameful, but I have a question for the BCLT that has not been able to be answered. Is this project moving forward based on agricultural worker housing or affordable housing? Because the legal requirements for each of these is different. Thank you.
I believe that is something that is going to be answered by the county and not certainly by the big. I know. BCLT, would you like to
Well,
respond
what I
to that?
would say is that here today, we're talking about the emergency. And that is a different matter than the permanent affordable housing. So the issues of the emergency permit are included in the permit, and that's what we're talking about today. So let's, I think.
I'll be really quick. My name is Lucy Hollingsworth. I'm with Legal Aid Marin. We provide free legal services to low income residents. My role at Legal Aid Marin is the policy advocate. I take the voices of our clients and I try and change the systems and the laws that benefit them. And I have been doing this for tenants for about 5 years. And it is it's probably one of the most common commonplace from the playbook for people that oppose affordable housing. Anytime we want tenant protection, rent stabilization, what they do is say, you're gonna make low income people homeless. And it's just not true. And there's no foundation in this. And I look forward to working with the tenants at the sheriff and figuring this out.
Would you like to?
Sorry.
Comment? You may.
My name's Wendy Botwin, and I wasn't gonna say anything because I really just wanted to hear what everybody had to say, and I still do. But I also have emotions like everybody else does, and just feel the need to say out loud that I support the residents that are in need of emergency housing. When obviously this has been an emergency for way too long and way past than we all knew about. And I'm also a new resident here. I've been here less than 4 years. I'm responsible for some of the housing stuff that's going on in Fairfax right now. It was because of me. And I didn't know that Lucy was here, so thank you. And I've been through the Victory Village mess, and I feel really honored to be in this community that speaks so respectfully and with so much care. There is no decision that gets made even legally without emotions, and obviously we all have them. And I just want to voice my care also for the entire community, and I feel really privileged and honored to be here.
I've noticed that there have been some comments in the chat of people saying that they support, and I want to make sure that we are going to be not sure about those. All right. Now. Yes, if everybody would like to look for seats, stand up, stretch, take a deep breath. I personally stand up and stretch.
Did I go too fast?
No.
I thought my heart.
No.
Removed this, I know, I was wondering, I don't know if they'll figure as well there. Let me move this thing out. Just have to speak a little bit louder because and it was hard to hear.
That I can bring out a box of water for everybody.
Yeah, they're bringing stuff right now.
I'll get it so quick. Yeah. It's from the box of that.
That's it.
These are the last single-use plastic bottles that you're ever gonna see in the fire department. We're trying to get rid of them, so drink these out. We have one more case and then we're done on single-use plastic. That's my. Okay.
Can you carry on? We are moving on to item 5. I'm a librarian and I'm really good at shut. I don't know, I forgot. 5B, limited water use permit application for the Bolinas Community Land Trust. Limited water use permit applications for the water meter serving the vacant lot at 130 Mesa Road and for the water meter serving 160 Mesa Road. A request to stack the resulting water use allocations temporarily on the meter serving the vacant lot at 130 Mesa Road to serve the temporary private RV trailer camper. Jennifer, would you like to see? If the land trust wants to explain their.
If you'd like to explain your.
I will try to be brief given the time. Let me make 3 points, because I think it's all matter of public record at this point. We are not expanding use. We are simply stacking existing use and not burdening the system. Resolution 655 dictates the amount of water that can be used per meter. We have those data, we have the data to support the proposed use. For 160 Mesa, we have the data that's been provided to you and made available to the public. For 130 Mesa, we are permitted to use district average because the data, sufficient data. For each meter, you have the discretion to add 1,500 cubic feet per quarter. My understanding, though I may have been incorrect in that being eligible. I just Jennifer's my vote for any year that I may have been diverted.
Could we trouble Annie to get closer to a microphone so that she can be heard?
Yes. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Almost.
Okay. Now it's getting a little awkward. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
It's much better. It's just much better. Thank you. You don't have to bend. Sorry.
Okay, would you like me to repeat?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Please repeat.
Yes.
Okay, we are not expanding use. We are simply stacking use and not burdening the system. Resolution 655 dictates the amount of water that can be used per meter. We have the data to support the proposed use per meter. For 160 Mesa, we have the data that's been made publicly available. For 130 Mesa, we do not have adequate use data, so it is our understanding we're permitted to use the district average. For each meter, it's our understanding that we can add 1,500 cubic feet per quarter at the discretion of the board of directors. And I may have been confused when I submitted our request. So I defer to the manager's memo, which clarified for the board what is permissible. That was not devious on the part of the BCLT. It was just steep learning curve. Thank you for your grace with that. We believe that for at least one of the meters, the 1,500 discretionary additional amount would be appropriate, given the need that we've demonstrated for affordable housing for these residents, for all of the concerns that the community has provided. But the point here is we are asking for the limitation of water that is already being used today. So we are asking for the water that people are currently using to be made official. And I think, the analysis and the broader questions about the water moratorium and some of the valid points that have been brought up by members of our community, we defer humbly to the board to decipher what is in the best interest of the community, but we believe that the request we are making is very straightforward based on the regulations that the board has passed previously. Thank you.
You want me to say out loud what I said in the memo that's posted on the website as far as the applicable rules and regulations? I think we can. Okay. I'm not going to read the whole memo over again, but I laid out in here that talking about the emergency coastal permit, what's being required, and then the applicable rules that pertain to your decision tonight. Obviously grounded in the moratorium resolution, which is resolution 173, where you declared a water shortage emergency, established a moratorium on new connections, and established a limited water use permit policy that exists today, has continued and has existed throughout the duration of the moratorium, so that the board could continue to manage water use and ensure that we didn't see significant increases in water use. So in the original moratorium resolution, you have a formula that was applied up until more recently when the board sought to address some inequities that it felt had occurred during the course of administering the prior formula, which tended to punish people who conserve and reward people who use too much water. So the board tightened the rules effectively and enacted resolution 655. You did enact resolution 627 at one point. That was which was an initial attempt to do some modifying or tightening of the moratorium resolution provision, but that was then superseded when you passed resolution 655. And additionally, you passed resolution 671 that pertains and authorizes the board to allow the swapping or stacking of meters only in the context of affordable housing and only where the swap or stack is proposed to occur between commonly owned property. Okay, so under resolution 655, there's 3 alternatives in the formula, and the board is directed to award whatever is higher. And the first is that one that it tends to have been applied a lot in recent years when there's either been low water use at a meter or no water use at a meter. And that's under section A, which works out to be 2,700 cubic feet, which is effectively your floor on limited water use permits. And I think something that really needs to be understood, these are limits or caps on use. This is not a guarantee of water. Nobody in the community has a guarantee of any amount of water. And anybody doing anything at their property does it under the risk that there might not be water for it. If you plant a row of trees, if you establish a tropical garden, if you have more people living at your house, if you build a swimming pool, if you have a short-term rental, these were all of the sort of categories of uses of property that the board was confronted with during the rationing, when we were working on the resolution to potentially ration water. And so those are just uses of people with the board, the district manages the water. We don't say what you can do with it. But we are going to say how much you can use or how much you can't exceed under the limited water use permit process. So it is not a guarantee of water. It's a cap on how much can be used. And I think that's significantly misunderstood. So you're deciding how to cap or limit or personally restrict forever under this permit that would pertain to this particular property, unless it's moved at, because of the common owner, if it does become common ownership. So it's either 2,700 cubic feet, or the service's average quarterly water consumption over the prior 12 quarters, or an amount to be determined by the board, but not exceeding an additional 50% or 1,500 cubic feet per quarter, whichever is less, over the average consumption over the prior 12 quarters, which is kind of a word salad. But I'll use the numbers and explain how that gets applied. So in this case, under the first application is for 130 Mesa Road. You look at the analysis and apply resolution 655. And you see that the prior 12 quarters of use for the meter serving 130 Mesa Road turn out to be an average of 1,458 cubic feet. That is less than 2,700 cubic feet. And also, I believe I did the math that if we tried to apply, tried to apply the formula under section 7, that results in 2,187 cubic feet. So under the meter serving 130 Mesa Road, your resolution says you would conditionally grant a cap of 2,700 cubic feet on that meter. Okay, going to the 160 Mesa Road, the average quarterly water use over the prior 12 quarters works out to 16,733 cubic feet. And so again, when you're then applying and looking at under resolution 655, A, B, and C, if you awarded the amount under A is 2,700 cubic feet, under B, the 12 quarter average, 16,733. And then if you look to section C of the resolution, if you were to limit at the quarterly average use plus 50%, that would end up to be 25,100 cubic feet. Or if you add 1,500 cubic feet, it would be 18,233 cubic feet. And with C, you're obligated to select the lower amount. So that gives you the choice of 2,700 cubic feet, 16,703 cubic feet, or 18,233 cubic feet. But if you do proceed under section 3, you must also be satisfied that the customer has documented that the allocation available under A or B, whichever is higher of those, would result in a hardship to the customer or a reduction of services provided to the Bolinas community. So you would need to make that finding in order to proceed, in order to select the cap that is calculated under provision C. And then finally, there's the request to stack the resulting water use allocations among us, whatever you would determine. And that's under resolution 671, which does allow the board to stack water use allocations for affordable housing projects where affordable housing is the sole purpose of the project, unless there's additional requirements imposed by another regulatory entity, state, federal, or local, with jurisdiction over the project. This is at the discretion of the board taking in those factors. So if you have the discretion to allow the stacking, but you must also find that the affordable housing is the sole purpose of the project, and that the water service connections at issue are both owned by the project proponent. So those are the rules you need to apply to the application.
Can I do a clarifying point, since I believe both properties are not owned by the BCLT, is that correct? Annie, still here?
That's correct.
Both properties are not owned, but you're asking for the advisement to both, so can we grant held up on the condition that ownership is the property is owned by BCLT at some point? That's when the
You're asking for condition. So yes,
You can grant the LWUPs on the face of the LWUP applications for each separate property. But if you were to agree to stack it, you would need to condition it on satisfying those two criteria. Yeah. Don.
Hi, I'm Don Smith. I've been on this board for 19 years. I just stepped down. And a lot of moratorium items that come through me and us during that time. And I just wanted to clarify some things about the moratorium, because there's a lot of confusion out there about it. I see again and again. The moratorium, as it was originally conceived, and still exists, limits the number of meters to something like 600. It's frozen. It does not limit how much water any holder can use out of that meter, unless they add onto their living space under county building permits. When they apply for a building permit, the county asks this agency, as part of their due diligence, can you serve this project with water? And that's what triggers the limited water use permit. So you only get a limit on your water use when you build under county permits. Now, as we all know, there's a lot of illegal building in West Marin. In fact, most of the affordable housing in West Marin is illegal. And so we have about a fifth of the customers in Bolinas with limited water use permits. And I would guess that at least half, maybe 2/3 of the customers in this town have done some illegal building. And so there's an inequity built into the moratorium from day one. And resolution 655 that Jennifer just mentioned was something that we came up with a few years ago to, narrow that inequity some, but there's still a lot of inequity. So the land trust, being, a public agency, they have to go through building permits. So they can't, duck the system like the rest of us can. And so everything gets a lot more expensive. And they have a limit on their water use. But the way that limit is calculated, as Jennifer just explained, is based on historical usage. So if you have been using a lot of water for the last 3 years, for whatever reason, that is the basis on which your future cap on water gets established. And so the people living at the Sharers are using a lot of water because there's a lot of people. But they've been pretty conservative. And over the last 3 years, which is the averaging period for determining the water use permit, they've been using about 23 gallons a day per person. And that's not an onerous amount of water to have to live by. Actually, there are a lot of families in Bolinas who use less than 23 gallons a day per person, including myself and my wife and many others that I know. You just have to be careful, that's all. When it comes to irrigation, that's a whole nother story. And we see BCPUD sees a big spike in water use in the summer, of course, because everybody's watering their gardens. And there are customers who don't have a lot of people living on their property who are using enormous amounts of water, and they can use all the water they want if they don't have a cap on their water use, and they're willing to pay for it. So, that's just the way the moratorium is set up. So all of these fears about breaking the moratorium are unsubstantiated completely. The land trust is not asking for anything special here. They're asking the BCPUD to apply the standard formula that they would apply to any customer in the district. That's all they're asking for. And I have no doubt that the people in this community at the Sharers are going to be able to hold to that cap, because they already have been holding to less than that cap for years. And not only that, but we just went through the worst drought in the history of the BPUD. And we were on the brink of establishing a mandatory ration. But we did not have to do so, despite the fact that we have all these people at Teixeira's using water and a lot of other situations in Bolinas where people are stuffed into a house because it's the only way they can afford to stay here and have 10 or 15 people living in a house. There are situations like this, and some of them have limited water use permits and they are struggling, but we got through that drought without having to enact a mandatory ration because people started to conserve, thanks in large part to Jennifer's calling up individual customers and pestering them until they reduced their water use. And so the point here is there's a lot of room for conservation. Yes, we have a very limited water supply, and that's the only reason that the moratorium held up in court is because of the limitation of Arroyo Hondo Creek. It was not, it would never have flown in court as an anti-development measure. It's not an anti-development measure. That's illegal for a water district to do that. We have a limited water supply, but with conservation, we can accommodate everybody, including the people at the Teixeira's. All of the extra water beyond 23 or 25 gallons a day is going to irrigation. It's going to people who come for the weekend in an STR and aren't aware of the water shortage out here and just use all the water they want. And it's not a problem to grant this permit. It's under the rules of the moratorium, and it's not going to be a difficult thing for the tenants there to stay within that water allotment. I would urge the board to grant the additional 1,500 cubic feet per quarter. It's only a 9% add-on to the average use over the last 3 years, and it would give them a little bit of a break on that, and it's not going to matter a hill of beans as far as the total water use in the town goes. But those are the rules of the moratorium, and I hope you will spread the word about that because there is a lot of confusion about it out there.
Alicia?
Hi, so I'm just trying to square some of what I just heard, and the things I've read. I mean, first of all, well, let me just say, it was very hard to follow the numbers that were read earlier, and I appreciate that those were read out. I'm a little bit confused about what I saw at the last BPUD board meeting, where there was a gentleman who has children on the mesa, and there was a hearing to terminate his water meter, and he went on and on and on and was held to account by this board for his water use, and he was just marginally over. And I just don't see how what I just heard here being said was consistent with what was the conversation with that gentleman about he having a family and a house and is trying to conform to the limits and is being publicly, I felt, shamed about it. And I just don't understand, I guess. And the other prong that I don't understand is, it sounded to me that the rule was stated that any stacking has to happen across properties that are owned by the same title, I guess. And I thought I heard pretty clearly that that's not the case here. And so those are my questions.
Thank you. Do you want me to speak to the enforcement?
Yeah.
Enforcement? Yeah, what occurred at the last meeting was the enforcement of a limited water use permit. So, and that's done on an as needed basis. We obviously try to work with the customers and help them bring down their water use so they're not in violation. But if someone does violate the terms of their limited water use permit, for example, in this case, if either of these two permits get issued and there's a violation, it would have that's our process. It's laid out in resolution 655. There's a notification given. They're given 30 days to come back into compliance. And then if they aren't able to come back into compliance, then there's a hearing before the board. And it does sound as an ominous consequence, which is the termination of the water service, but that is what that's the authority that you have to as an enforcement tool. And we seek to avoid that. I don't think it's ever had to be done. But and because we work with the customers, but that's what you saw as the enforcement process in action.
Comments? Questions? Not questions, comments.
I have a comment if it's time. So this is Melinda Griffith. And it seems to me what Don Smith was saying is that right now, many properties in Bolinas have an unlimited water use permit. That only, if I heard correctly, only about 20 to 25% of Bolinas meters are capped. And which is really quite extraordinary. If we're talking about water conservation, we really should be talking about putting in caps for the entire Bolinas water meters. And there shouldn't be any unrestricted water meters, unrestricted usage meters, truly. And our meter is limited because we went through a permitting process, and so that a limit was imposed on us, and so we have a capped water meter. It seems to me it's an advantage right now for in this process to have the Teixeira water meter now be capped. They've had a high usage, and if I'm understanding correctly, they have an unlimited water usage. It is not capped. And so in this process of this emergency housing process and then moving to permanent housing, we will now be imposing caps based on their historic usage, which is a benefit to all of us, because if in fact this proposal and project does not go through and the land is sold on the open market, albeit with all of its frailties and issues and dump, the buyer would be buying an unlimited water meter. And so we're putting at a disadvantage on our water meter usage than what this current proposal suggests. So I think that's an important thing for the water moratorium. And Don, I appreciate your comments that this is actually in line with the water moratorium and does not put it at risk. So thank you.
I'm not gonna repeat all this stuff. I'm also, Lyndon, I'm also an ex-board member. It's kind of already been through this before, but.
It's very difficult to hear you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Maybe you could sit next to the mic.
Yeah, I am close to the microphone, but I have my mask on. So I agree with Don. There's all kinds of confusion. I was saying to him, I wish I had a nickel for every time when I was on the board that somebody told me that the board was about to break the moratorium for a decision we're about to make. And, so I actually had read all the regulations pertaining to the moratorium when I was on the board. I think most board members have. This is not a board that tends to be asleep at the switch. And the staff is definitely not asleep at the switch at this organization, I'm happy to say. So they tend to point it out, and speaking of Jennifer here, if the board isn't paying any attention. So, you know, if you're concerned that the board is paying no attention to the moratorium and the regulations that enforce the moratorium, your concern is misguided. And one of the first things I did when I got on that board is I read the judge's decision. You know, this was 10 years ago, so don't ask me to quote it now. But I read the decision from the ELF case. So I understood what the decision was based on and what the case was about. So I think you can feel a lot of confidence actually that this board is doing its best to uphold the moratorium rules, which are, surprise, surprise, law. The fact that we have, you know, a sixth of the people or a fifth, whatever it is, have limited water use permits and everybody else is unrestricted. Is that a great system? Guess what? It's not. Is it unfair? Sure, it's unfair. Is it going to be easy to deal with? No, it's going to be really difficult to deal with. And part of the reason we struggled so much to do the emergency rationing plan is because we had to make that more equitable than how the LWAP process works. So that's why we spent a huge amount of time trying to figure out what the rationing restrictions were going to be per household and what all the exceptions were going to be. And for the businesses, and if it was a household with a lot of people, how much water we should allow per household, which my memory was, we set it at 25 gallons per full-time resident, which we sent out our staff to confirm how many full-time residents there were at that house, if it was going to be more than the 5 that you kind of got automatically. So the board has paid a lot of attention to this whole question of this, and it's not easy to solve in terms of the equity issues here. So there are equity issues about how this is being, how the moratorium is being implemented, that, as Don pointed out, date back to the beginning of the moratorium. The basic framework, which was really just to put in place, I think, just to avoid people doing obvious end runs around the moratorium. They, you know, just build whatever you want and just put it on one meeting. So, you know, they had to put in restrictions. They tried to do as best they could, not looking 50 years in the future, knowing how everything would play out, about how to do that. So they basically based it on how much use had you had. You couldn't say to a business that you have to limit yourself to the same amount of water as a household gets, or that business would be gone. You just can't say to a restaurant, okay, you have to use the same water as a household with 3 people. So that's why they created those restrictions the way that they did. So really, I think almost all of the issues that I've heard brought up in this, and I read all of the comments that were put online, are the kinds of things that the board has already been aware of for a long period of time for people who've been on or, you know, paid attention to this organization. So I agree with Don that what's being asked here is actually just straight up under the existing moratorium regulations, which, by the way, are all on the BCPUD website. And please, if you keep saying that the board is about to break the moratorium, please go read the rules that you're accusing them of breaking before you tell them that they've just broken the rules. You know, Jennifer is trying to explain what the options are under the existing rules. Should those rules be tweaked further in the future? Sure, they should, but that's not what's being presented to the board today. What's being presented to the board today is under the existing rules, how much water should the LWAP be? Now, honestly, I think it should probably be conditional as well in terms of whether they get their permits. And if it is conditional on whether they get their permits, then no permits means no LWAP, as far as I can get. And also similarly with the stacking, they don't get the properties at the same ownership, can't stack. So I think it's conditional on both grounds, it seems to be. But you know, I think this decision is actually pretty straight up.
in terms of they're not asking for something that's not under the existing moratorium regulations as published on the BCPUD website. And, you know, if they can't live within those regulations, then, you know, it's gonna be a tough problem. And sure, with the fellow who just came in, who by the way, is my neighbor last meeting, and said, you know, and he had to comply, and he hadn't done enough to comply. And part of his problem is there was 2 people living in his main house before, there's 8 people living there now, plus he's got 2 ADUs. So honestly, he would get more water under mandatory rationing than he's got under our element. Does that make sense? No, it doesn't make any sense. But that's the program that applies to his house right now. I don't think he even knows that, but he doesn't even know about the mandatory rationing. That was what he inherited when he bought that place. I don't think he's going to buy it. So he's got to figure out how to deal with it, or else come to the board and say, you know, is there any way you can help? That's the rules that we put in place and that we struggled with as a board because they are far from perfect. But what's being asked here, as far as I can see, is just apply the existing rules. So it doesn't strike me as an inherently tough decision under the existing rules. In terms of whether the rules need more work, yeah, well, that's going to be a long-term proposition. That's been a decision that's been waiting for 50 years already. Basically, you know, made a few tweaks. But in terms of fundamental flaws with the regulation structure for the moratorium, and it's been in place for 50 years, and it's not imminent this week, but it's completely devised, as far as I know. I don't know what you guys are doing. So, yeah.
So can I ask a question of the 2 gentlemen who've been speaking? Because it seems like I don't understand how it is or what is being asked when they say a conditional use to stack. I thought the rule, which I did to the extent I could, go in, I read what I could on the website and read the resolutions and the history. And it strikes me that there's a bright line rule that you can't stack where the properties are not owned by the same parties.
That's what we're proposing to comply with. That's true.
Say that again?
That's what they're proposing to comply with. There will be no stacking unless the ownership takes place.
And so is the request to stack it now and wait for the ownership?
Conditional. What they're saying is it's conditional upon the ownership has to be in the same hands, otherwise the stacking does not take place.
So do I understand? Let me just make sure I'm hearing it right. You're saying that there will be no water permit currently allowed, and it would only come into effect once the ownership is combined? Or are you saying it is granted now?
You guys are on the board, you should answer this. But
I have a proposal on how to move forward with this, and I'm not trying to watch the conversation. Continue this.
I'm just trying to understand.
I want to run something by the board in the public, and BCLT of considering these issues separately and 3 separate motions. One, to consider a limited water use permit for 130 Mesa Road. Another motion to consider a limited water use permit for 160 Mesa Road. And a third motion to consider the stacking of both those permits with all the conditions we've mentioned, ownership of both properties, stacking, affordable housing restrictions with the stacking. So I have some questions for you, Andy, and BCLT about some of those things, but I just want to run that by the board and see what you guys think about separating them out separately. If
it's okay with the agenda item, I think.
Separately. What do you think about that? Are you okay with that? I mean, it
Yes.
seems like trying to group them all into one might get a little messy, especially if we have conditions that we're considering, so.
John?
I just have a comment,
So I mean, sorry, could I just have the question answered?
I
Because
think, wait, I think.
I asked the question at the first time I spoke and it didn't get answered. And the couple of gentlemen have been able to speak at length. And I've asked a simple question and I would like to understand it. I mean, what is it that's being asked? That a permit be currently allowed, that is currently goes and the condition can be met later? Or is it that the permit is only, the tap only turns on when when the conditions are met? What is it that's being requested right now?
As far as, well, Annie, do you want to speak to what you're requesting, or I can speak to what?
Request the board to clarify.
Okay, are you asking about the limited water use permits? Which? is
I'm
that-
asking
And
the stacking across property lines.
Okay, as far as I can tell, we can issue the limited water use permits for both properties individually tonight. Those will go into effect immediately, I believe, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Uh,
Unless you put any
BCLT
conditions.
unless there are conditions.
Yeah.
BCLT owns the property at 130 Mesa. I believe the Teixeira family owns the property at 160 Mesa. We can also approve, make a motion and vote on it to approve a stacking of those two water meters to be used at 130 Mesa for the temporary RV park, which we're considering tonight, with the condition that common ownership of both those properties is held by BCLT, and all water for that stack is to be used solely for affordable housing. That's my understanding of it. And he gives a thumbs up. So does that answer your question?
And so so I guess what I'm trying to understand is if the bright line rule says that you can't stack across property lines, and as I guess what you're saying is that to the extent that someone would come to this board and say, there are two parties and they would like to combine their properties and they would like currently to get permission to start, put development plans in place with that kind of stacking contemplated in the future, that BCLT would be in a position to say yes, provided that we will give it to you now, provided that you combine title later. Is that what I've heard?
That's part of the resolutions. Stacking option. The stacking does not take effect if there's no common ownership.
Yeah, you hear that? There's your answer. Yeah, we're just, the stacking does not take effect unless there is common ownership of both properties by one entity or person. In this case,
But
CLT.
And it must be deed restricted to affordable housing.
Right, so if you look at resolution 671, which is on the website, and you look at exhibit A, it specifies specifically to affordable housing.
Mhm. I'm just hung up on.
That's the document that's gonna answer your question.
Okay, John, or next.
Yeah, I agree with Lyndon that this isn't breaking the moratorium because it's following the rules of the moratorium. The thing that I'm concerned about is that it pushes the legality of the water moratorium. The reason why I mention it is 23 years ago, this same board said no to a very similar project. The difference is that project was permanent, and this one is for temporary emergency solution to the current arrangement. And so from my standpoint, because the district is responsible for water for anyone in the district, including property that don't have water meters, I think that it's important for the district to differentiate why they're doing something different now than they were 3 years ago, but they said that.
Sorry, we don't supply water to properties without water.
But you,
How would that process work?
well, everyone that's in the district is in the district. And so anyone that's denied water, you have to have a justification for water.
You haven't had water.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No water, no water.
Right, so the reason why you aren't issuing more water meters. So what I'm saying is, 23 years ago, the board said no. This board could say yes or no, and so if it says something different, it would be important to differentiate why this is different than it was 20 years ago, because the water supply hasn't changed.
Yeah, the board did,
23
the
years
board,
ago, because I think you might not have that.
the board didn't take any action on that project in 2020, the year 2000. They discussed it I was able to get a cassette recorder and listen to the 2000 discussion that occurred during that meeting. And the project had been sent to the district. There was nobody there at the meeting to speak to it or explain it. There was discussion, hypothesis, guessing, speculation about what might be involved. And then they said, well, we need to convey to the county that we haven't made a determination about water use. And then as that went on, Phil ultimately said at the end of the meeting, I'll send a letter saying that the water use hasn't been assured, or whatever the language was in his letter. No action taken, no limited water use permit applied for, no permit given.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is that. What I'm saying is that what's being applied for is for an emergency response to this current need. And I think that is what the unfortunate key is for a temporary solution. I think that anything more than that risks the validity of the water moratorium logic. I'm not saying it's wasted. I think it's just, to Lyndon's point, he said, we're not supposed to just build whatever you like on the 1 meter, and that's what's happened since 1993. That 1 meter has resulted in, I think, if you're going to replace the households, 23 households, 25 households.
Right. Because they didn't apply for building permits. That is happening all over town.
And that's what I'm saying is that this district has some responsibility. So it's important to say what it is you're doing today, which is for this emergency.
That's what the application is for.
And want to make sure people understand it's emergency, not for the coming.
Correct.
And it should be in the more emotional, so that if someone can not get critically, they would see the difference.
I believe the limited water use permit is permanent, it's not temporary.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So that's important for you to understand that.
Yeah, I understand. The limited water use permits that we grant here are permanent. They're tied to the water meter, so in perpetuity.
So it could be used for permanent project.
I believe so.
When it's applied.
It is a cap, but limits on water use of that water meter at whatever level we determine.
I just want you to make sure you understand that this can be used for a permanent project, not just.
Yeah, right now the water meter can be used for permanent projects. They have an unlimited water use permit. They can use as much water as they want. What we're trying to decide tonight, with the limited water use permit, is to cap that.
Right, and what I'm saying, is being capped at a very thing.
Yeah, well, it's still less than the.
That's the way ladies and gentlemen, about.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, hi, I'm Mark Fisher. I'm a short-term resident compared to almost all of you. I've only been here about 4 years. I can't help but feel as though there is something that's not being spoken to, which is the folks that live there need a place, but the way that they came here was not consistent with the spirit of the water moratorium. In that, it was done in the same way that, what did we say, 80% of the places here were built additionally without permits, and people use water however. So today, if you do the number, they're using roughly 10 times the sort of ballpark limit that we were talking about when there was going to perhaps be rationing per household, however you want to put it. So there's a little bit of a conflict now in making that something that could go forward into the future with regard to the spirit of the original moratorium. It's not saying it's the wrong thing to do from a human perspective. These are humans. We should be honoring their existence and treating them with love. How I feel. But I also see this conflict of logic. And I can't resolve it. I think But, you know, when I listen to the people who bring up factual objections, that's the one that resonates for me. It's kind of difficult to reconcile, and I wish you luck in making the right decision. I certainly can. But that's the conflict, that's the one place where I see a possible conflict, and I'll solve it.
I see.
And Dawn, maybe, I was hoping that Dawn and Linda would make this easier.
I stand up longest. I will start to set timer. And I can, I think.
Well, I'd like to say very briefly that I think that Dr. Sawyer made a salient point at the end of what she said about the water moratorium committee, whether if you are concerned about, if one is concerned about water usage, we're all better off if there is a limited usage on the not limited usage. And the points that Lyndon and Don made are very well taken on that point. As it relates to the moratorium. Thank you. My only concern is that in addition to the condition of common ownership, that there be a clear deed restriction that we finally will land that will impose upon not only the current owners, but God only knows in 50 years if this property will be under the control of ownership of BCLC. That for any future owner of the land, that it can't be used for some low income and some not low income, some short-term rental, all long-term, all long-term rental, short-term rental, or even a commercial use, some kind of mini hotel or something like that. The restrictions should be a clear condition on this. If that's done, I think this is. If it's a deed restriction that runs with land, it's very, very difficult for subsequent owners.
Just want to clarify that in addition to the fact that the stacking is only available for an affordable housing project, anything that BCLC does, usually, I mean, I can't think of a case, you know, board members correct me if I'm wrong, but it is all deed restricted. We are in the business of creating permanent affordable housing, so it is part of our mission to ensure that it's permanently deed restricted. So it is not a hardship to agree to that condition, because the last thing we ever want to do is create something that stops being affordable. And in this case, we will likely end up having something that's deed restricted for a lower Airbnb income level than just about any other property in existence. So it will truly be low.
iPad, is that Janine?
Yes. I just have a technical question, and I know the stacking of meters is a relatively recent right for affordable housing. But the point was, okay, this seems like, I'm just curious because, and maybe Jennifer, maybe you can answer this, but normally they are the same owner that stacks the meters. Now, in this case, you have two different owners. So what does conditional mean? I mean, before the board votes on this, what does the term conditional mean as the land trust is proposing it? And that's my question. Thank you.
Maybe it's hard for the folks who are, I don't know how to explain it other than maybe the audio is not transmitting. So I'm just gonna do this really awkward, like really close thing. Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, I can
Like,
hear you.
generous
That's much
way. Like,
better.
can you hear me now? I don't know how else to say this other than in like really layman's terms. We are not going to stack the water meters unless we own both properties. That is the only way in which we're asking. We have to get this water permit made with conditional approval, meaning there are conditions such as we are the owner of both properties. We have to have the water permit so that we can complete the building permit. We have to have the building permit so that we can complete the purchase and sale. Everything is dependent on each other, so we're here starting with this point, asking that it be conditional because we haven't been able to complete the other parts of the process because this part has to happen first. So I know it's confusing, but I hope it's really clear that we are only interested in stacking if we own both properties. Because to be clear, that is the only way this project goes forward. We are not moving forward with this project unless we complete the purchase and sale of 160 Mesa.
Okay, thank you. That's good.
Thank you. That does that answered the question I had earlier. And so, but Annie, don't go away. The question.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
There's a few people ahead of you in line.
Okay. Sorry.
Let's keep it civil, guys. Everybody, let's keep it civil, please, everybody.
Cameron.
I mean, I know I'm a broken record with this one, but I feel like there has to come a point where there's just times when humanity trumps semantics, and this plan isn't perfect. And we all know that it isn't absolutely perfect. It's a temporary situation. And I think that we all need to like look inside and think about the fact that we're all sitting here on stolen land, deciding the fate of these human beings and whether they have the right to live in humane conditions. And that in itself should bother you to your very core. And then we need to realize that if someone wants to fight this later, once we've pushed it through, then we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But you have a woman sitting in that room with you that went through chemotherapy in those living conditions, who fought and fought, who has 2 small children, who is a beautiful human being, who should never have had to go through that. And we owe it to her. And people, if they want to think that I'm being mean or this is picky and I'm saying that you don't have humanity, and that's the way you're going to take it, then I can't control that. That's how you're going to take it. But if you're going to walk around in this town and look these people in the eye, you have to let humanity trump all the other stuff right now and push this through.
Thank you.
And that's the last thing that I will say tonight.
All right, we're going to wrap. We're heading towards wrapping up the community expression. Doug Lee's had his hand up. Don, I've seen your hand.
Yeah.
Doug.
Excuse me. Hi, this is Doug. I've been tuning in as much as I can here. I just want to ask, who owns the water, right? And, water is a human right. And I know there's people concerned about water meters, and if there's enough water, there is enough water. And we proved it as a community when we self-rationed our community. We had that board up at the intersection. We, as a community, worked together to conserve water. We have enough water. The Teixeiras have had enough water for the last 20 years. The water's there. Who owns the water? We, the people, own the water.
Thank you.
It's our water. Thank you.
Dawn, I see a couple more hands up. There's some people who've already had a lot of time. And I'd like to bring this back to the board.
I just wanted to respond to the point that John Bryant and Mark Fisher brought up, which is basically inequity in the original way the moratorium was constructed, which is that it did not limit the water use on a meter unless you built under permit. And so my personal opinion is that all meters should have a cap on their water use. It's appropriate for the particular property. But that's a huge step for the board because it involves taking a privilege away that you've previously granted people for the last 50 years. And that can lead to a nightmare of court battles. And it's why I think they set up the moratorium that way in the first place. When they first set up the moratorium, they took the path of least resistance. Freeze the status quo. That's what they did. You've got a meter, we can continue to do what you're doing with that water. But no more meters, and if you build out of your place, you're gonna get a limit. And that's the way it's been all along. So tonight, we're bound to follow the rules of the existing moratorium. A separate issue later on that I think the board should take up is how can we make the moratorium more equitable? And the way to do that would be to have a cap on every meter. But that is a huge thing to swallow.
So I spent a lot of time today reading back the notes from the drought. It's really interesting. Back in February, 2021, you guys actually evaluating how to ration water. And when we talk about water inequity, the moratorium inequity, I think it's the water scarcity is inherently inequitable. One of the things that was interesting to see is that if you averaged out across all meters in Venus, supply was about 106 gallons of water a day, and the consumption was 103 gallons of water a day, small meters. But it didn't work out that way if you evaluated the usage, right? I mean, the only reason why we were able to suggest 125 gallons of water a day usage was because some people were using the water. There were a fraction of meters that were using far more than 125. And I think what's difficult, and it's important to talk about because I think it's so important for our formulas going forward, is that this meter on the table today is one of those meters that used far more. It used 800% more water. It required 800% more water in the other residential meters. It's just something raised. And so the question is, how do we think about that going forward? At the time, Jennifer had to present to the board any exceptions that you make based on population density of different meters does mean a lower supply available to meters. This is something that you guys have discussed at length. How should we determine, should it just be on a meter basis or should it be based on the population? Something Dawn raised was what about these people that are also providing affordable housing or have large families on their meters? Right. So my understanding is that there might be some control in terms of number of structures associated with the meter, but that's for you guys to think about. So thank you. All right.
Hi, this is Doug. Is it okay if I?
I've entertained extremely brief comments.
Thank you.
The two that are still have their hands up, Cheryl, you did have your hand up, and then we're gonna turn this off.
Okay.
So Doug, go quickly and then.
Oh, sure. We the people, right? If you're a community member, if you live in this community, you should be allowed to have water. I don't care which house you live in, where you are in this town. It should be by the person. It's my water. I pay taxes. We all pay taxes. We pay for it. Then we pay our water bills, but it's our water. If I live here, I should deserve to have water.
Thank you. Cheryl, Alicia, very briefly, please.
Thank you. I wish we could all have water just because we live here, but we know that it's not just the water moratorium, it's the reality of the scarcity of water and the climate change that's coming ahead and more droughts. And my concern is that the Teixeira Ranch has been the second highest user of water, and that's with 50 or 60 people not having toilets and sinks and showers. So my concern is that the use of water will not be limited to what this limited water use permit will allocate. And then what? What will the board do when the usage far exceeds what the allotment is. And secondly, I just want to say that I still have not gotten an answer to the question, which is this going forward under a permit for affordable housing or agricultural worker housing? Because it's my understanding that there's an issue with this stacking and a deed restriction with respect to affordable housing. And affordable housing will not be able to guarantee these residents housing. Thank you.
Can I respond? I just want to say that affordable agricultural worker housing is the vision for the permanent housing. The emergency permit is what it is. I think that's what we're here to discuss. So Cheryl, let's take it into a further conversation so the board can move forward. I think the other thing that's important to know is that the residents have, many of them have had flush toilets, there are washing machines, there are shower facilities. They might be non-compliant, they might be up to code, but it's only within the last year that all residents went to portable toilets. So the water use data, as I explained in the letter, accommodates that usage. And the final point that I'd like to make for the public, because I think the board's already aware of this, is that the BCLT has proven to be a very good steward of our scarce water resources across all the properties that we have in the community. We have a documented historic use of 21 gallons per person per day, because we are committed to being a good steward of the scarce resource. And so we use all of the techniques that are available that you counsel people on whenever you're having to do your enforcement. So we have no concern, zero, that we will be able to stay within that limit that we're asking for, or actually lower it. Thank you.
I just want to speak to the issue that if the properties exceed the water use allocation, the water limit that you set, we will enforce it. We will enforce against that in the exact same way it was enforced against at the last meeting, which was a very marginal overage. If one drop over is enforcement, there's a bright line. So that's what will happen. It's just a fact.
You have a significant thing is, to your point, you have it about separating your emotions, which I think makes sense. But I'm also realizing that because this is a permanent LMOC, if this project doesn't go through, which I think will, whoever ends up with that water meter would have this very large water use. It could be used for whatever. If I'm wrong, that's correct. But I think if you do separate them out, creating a line.
Unless we make it contingent on issuance of a building permit.
This building.
Yeah, so tonight we're voting on the temporary, right?
Just this building.
Then it will come back again when they're ready to look at 160, and we'll have that opportunity again.
Do you understand my point? I know that there have been people that have redone their houses and stuff like that, and when this board has said, you have to come back to 224, the board said, they have to push back. The board said, okay, you get to keep your L1. So if you give this property 160, a very large limit, and the project doesn't go through, whoever owns that water meter will have the right to do whatever they want with that.
The alternative is that the property is sold with an unlimited water limit.
After today, it won't be.
Well, I think that I will request right now something that I was going to wait till you were entertaining emotions, which is that I do not feel that the BCLT, simply because we are in negotiations with the receiver to purchase the Teixeira Ranch, has the right to permanently limit that. So I would request that the limited water use permit for 160 be contingent upon, conditional, whatever the word is that we've all agreed to use to represent that it can only happen if the purchase and sale, because otherwise we are denying what is a larger value to the receiver. And I don't believe that they would agree to that. So everyone should really hope that it goes through. And I'm not saying that to be threatening or divisive. I'm saying that because otherwise what will happen if this project, and I'm sorry, it's late. I don't mean to sound hyped up. But I think it's important that the community be clear that if this emergency housing permit does not go through, BCLT will not purchase the property. That will happen. The receiver told me today he will have no choice but to sell the property on the open market, which means that we will all have all the concerns we've discussed. A large piece of property going on sale on an open market with an unlimited water permit with that historic use that we've established, and that to share a family and all of the residents will be paid resettlement benefits, but they will all be displaced. So that is why what we're deciding tonight is so important, because while there might be a slight chance that this doesn't go through exactly as we hope or whatever, there is 100% chance that if this does not go through, the property will be sold on the open market. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be fear mongering. I don't want to scare anyone that's in this room, but the property will be sold and everyone will be displaced. So that is the stakes that we're discussing.
I don't want to be misunderstood. An unlimited water meter is worth less than a water meter that's been granted 1,400 gallons a day.
No.
That's not true. Yes,
All the water you want. You don't have.
They'll apply for your building.
I have an unlimited water meter. So if I were to apply, I would be limited to 2,700 because I don't use that much water. It would take me 3 years to waste an enormous amount of water to be able to get this board to give me 1,400 a day. So all I'm saying is if this board grants this water meter 1,400 a day, that water meter is very valuable. Someone doesn't have to waste water for 3 years. Do you understand that? And so if Annie's saying that it should be contingent, I think that protects this property from becoming more valuable. I know you guys think that unlimited is very valuable, but you have to waste water for 3 years to have any real value. If you don't understand that, I'm going to explain. Jennifer, do you want to-
So
I'd like to.
I think you're right, and I don't think we can agree with a limited water use permit for the property that, own. A limited water use permit that you're applying for that you don't know. So I think making that condition of your ownership, BCLT ownership of that property is appropriate. For 160.
So can I ask the question that I've been waiting to ask for a while?
Alicia, I would really like to go to the board now. We've had hours and hours of public discussion. If you have further questions, you can,
Did you have a question?
No, sorry, I was just. You can put it in the chat eventually.
You're okay?
I'm good, yeah, I was just wondering if, how we proceed in terms of people keep talking, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
have we reached
we're
it?
going
I
there.
heard of it.
I have a question for Annie or Sean. Do you, will the agricultural use, the farming cease if stacking happens, because that's the condition of the affordable housing use only for the water?
The agricultural activity relies on the holding ponds and water that's collected on site. So the agricultural use is not related to the meters. Thank you.
Maybe similar to that, maybe building on that question, in your letter of application, you said if there's, after about a year of this temporary project happening, you'd evaluate your water usage with this project. If there's any extra, it could be applied to something community-based, or I think you mentioned agricultural co-op. But again, I just want to reiterate that the stacking is only for affordable housing. So that extra water, I believe, as far as I understand, it couldn't be used for other purposes.
Would it be possible for us to request to unstack at a future date?
What's stacking? Sure. Stacking is when you take 2 water meters owned by the same person or entity, and you stack them for use at one property. So you get the benefit of both water meters and their associated limits, but only to be used for affordable housing. And that is a BCPUD resolution. Previously. Yeah, not tonight.
Yeah.
So for example, let's imagine that we wanted to have a daycare on site. Let's imagine that we wanted to have something else that the community would benefit from, that we all agreed that through a community process, we wanted and felt was justified. Would we be able to unstack the water meters so that the smaller water meter was available if the residents proved that they were able to live within? Because remember, BCLT, has the historic use of 21 gallons per person per day. Technically, that would fit within the 160 meter as of today, but we're trying, to leave ourselves some room given all of the community concerns. So that's the basis for the question.
I don't know that we have any historical precedent to be able to speak to that tonight, but I'm assuming if you were to come back and say, we have these two permits, we have this other, these 2 meters, we have this other property, we'd like to apply for taking one of those meters and allocating it over to this other property. I think that's something that we'll have to consider.
Yeah, I have to look, I think so. We'd have to look further at it. And I mean, it basically is also incident technically to a water meter transfer. Because resolution 671 amends the water meter transfer ordinance. And so that comes with it, the deed restriction on water use and everything as well. So that would, we'll have to look at that.
So that is completely acceptable. I want to be really clear that BCLT is happy to accept a decision that would be to permanently stack. If we can revisit at a later date, if it should make sense for the community and for us to do so, great, happy to do that. Not looking for that to be something that has to be clear. We are happy to move forward as proposed, even if that means we're doing so in perpetuity.
Do you feel, does BCFT feel that you need this stack to make this project happen? If you were granted the higher amount, the maximum amount that you're asking for 160 Mesa, conditional upon your permission of it, and you swap the meters, you move that meter from 160 to 130 to provide water for this temporary project that's on the table tonight, is there a chance that that could be sufficient, leaving that other water meter open?
There is-
potentially to be stacked at a later date for that property?
Yes, there is absolutely a chance. Again, I go back to the 21 gallons per day, per person. Right, so
That might be-
I think that the reason that we asked for the stacking, just to be clear, was really due to the intense amount of community discourse we had over the fear that the change in water use behavior, moving from the portable toilets, basically the fact that it's a subjective assessment of what's sufficient, and that we knew there was a lot of community discourse about what would be sufficient, and we were afraid if we set it too low, we would leave ourselves vulnerable to not proving sufficient. So we were looking to increase with a margin, but I wholeheartedly believe that we can move forward with only the 160 allocation. And if it's an option to leave that open and revisit at a later date, happy to do it that way as well.
As far as I know, you can come to the board with a request for a stacking at a later date. That's as far as I know. Doesn't have to happen tonight, that's true.
I'm just trying to think it through because the swapping requires a common ownership as well. So what is the point is, so it still requires a common ownership.
I think because we don't have a mechanism in place for unstacking water meters. Maybe that's.
So that would take that third agenda item if you're asking.
Possibly, I mean, if you're talking about
I see what
if you're asking to unstack them potentially at some point to free up a water meter for something else, then I'm just saying.
I think
don't know if you
what we'd be doing is based on my understanding, and I defer to Jennifer and the board, certainly as experts, I think we'd be replacing that third agenda item with a swap instead of a stack. So I think that would be the request, and I just want to clear something up, because I think there's been a lot of confusion that in the planning process, we were required to design over-engineer the septic system and over-engineer the plans for the trailer park. So it looks like, I think the septic system's designed for something like 35 gallons per day per person. I mean, Sean, correct me, please. let me go on record and saying I don't totally trust my numbers on that, but 25. Okay,
I think it's 1,800 gallons per day. Total, and I think you're asking for 1,700 gallons, but
okay.
more or less.
Thank you for having
So,
faculty with the numbers. Let's go with, it is over-engineered for what we expect to put through, and the park itself is also over-engineered for a maximum load. So I want to be really clear that we are not in any way, BCLT is not looking to add residents to this temporary housing or to the septic system beyond the residents that are currently living there. So we would be very happy to go with a swap instead of a stack, because we believe we can serve the residents who are there with the swap.
I'm not asking you to do either way. I'm leaving that request up to you. I'm just trying to make sure that you're
Got it.
comfortable with what you're asking for. Whether it's a swap or a stack or.
We had a lot of discussion about this, and I think we, if the board feels that it would not impact the decision, if there's any concern about the board, among the board members of the BCLT having sufficient water for our plans, which I realize is not really the job of the board.
It's your job.
Okay, so then we would be glad. I'm just looking. Jeff, have you been following this discussion? Okay, then I'm gonna just enjoy the full, I'm looking at Howard. And I think that the truth is that BCLT would be delighted to have the chance to preserve a water meter for another use, or to have the chance to stack at a later date. So we would prefer to amend and go forward with only the 160 and a swap instead of a stack.
Yeah.
Is there any problem with that?
It'll be the common ownership, and I think you'll, and also just because as a technical matter, it's incident to transferring, we'd have to subject it to the technical transfer process, I think.
I don't know what you mean by that.
Because resolution 671 amends ordinance 38 that pertains to the transfer of water meters. So what you're technically doing is transferring the water meters across the two commonly owned properties. Which everyone should feel good about, because that requires additional deed restrictions on water use and agreement and so forth. And
So it's not swap, it's transfer.
well, because the swapping is, you're kind of allowed to do, you're not physically actually moving the meter. What you're doing is transferring the water use application.
Okay.
I have to just double check. So
I guess the one, this is a future question, but when you want to back off the temporary, back onto permanent places, they need to transfer again.
So whoever's speaking is inaudible online, please.
Yeah,
Okay. My point was, I guess I was asking Jennifer to clarify that we are, if we were to make this contingent on the temporary application tonight, and you want to take the 160 and swap it, would, once you go back to the 160 as a full-time occupancy, would they be able to swap again that meter?
Right.
Go back from-
you'd basically be transferring it permanently to back over to 160.
Right. That would be allowed.
Under the water meter transfer, you have to abandon all use. There could be no use requiring any water from the BCPUD water system on 130.
Right, and then that would just be a clarification, going back to ownership on the 60 property. And transfer that 160.
I'm not sure I'm fully following.
So let me say what we'd like to do. We'd like to take the water meter from 160 that has the higher allotment, whatever you determine it to be. We'd like to cap that, limit it, move it temporarily to the 130 parcel where we would like to use it for the temporary emergency housing. When the permanent housing is built, we'd like to move that back and use it at the 160 site. And all this time, we have the 130 meter that's just over here having its same little old no use, basically, just hanging out. So Jennifer, how, in what we just said, did you explain the board could allow for that? I didn't follow.
But that I thought you were just saying something else there, because then you're not, if you're swapping it, you're moving it over to 160. It can't be used at 130, if that's what you're.
I
if
think
that's
the
what-
question is, could they swap it? Because they want to swap it to the temporary use.
Yeah.
And then when they are going to their building permit for going back to 160.
Yeah.
Could they swap it back? to 160?
Yeah, as long, I mean, as long as it complies with all the resolutions. We can
Yeah.
have that checked, but
Okay.
yeah.
But we think that's swap. There and back.
Is it a swap or is it a transfer?
Yeah, because it's incident to the water, it's allowing the sharing of the water allocations between properties in the context of affordable housing in particular.
Okay.
So I believe, I mean, we can, get that confirmed and check with our council.
Okay.
Are you looking for that to happen tonight, or are you only looking for the limited water use permits today?
Well. Could we make our approval contingent on that clarification?
I think that what I will say is that we need to know that we have the water required for CDA in order to move forward with completing that permit and moving forward as fast as everyone's asking us to and wanting us to on the emergency housing. So I would be absolutely fine if it needs to go to legal counsel in your review, but would just ask, is that a week-long process? Is that a month-long? Like how long does it take to check with legal counsel?
I mean, I can't promise, but it's more like a week, I mean, not a month.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be. my
Yeah, I think
expectation.
if it supports the board and it supports the BPUD to help be the experts to best understand how to accommodate the request that we're asking, because I have to be honest, I'm getting a little lost in the transfers and the swaps and the whatevers, but I know what we want to do, and I think you're clear what we want to do. I think the community is clear what we want to do. So if you need legal counsel to advise on the best way that you can authorize or clarify, then of course you should have that opportunity. So would not want to.
I think it's just new information for us, stacking is something we investigated and thought about.
Got it.
Before this meeting, but now
Okay.
you're asking about unstacking, so
Okay,
I don't think any of us are comfortable saying yes to doing stacking.
right.
Likewise, we've swapped, transferred water meters, we've swapped them, we've transferred them from one property to another. As far as I know, we've never transferred them back or swapped them back, so you're just sort of asking.
I got it.
Uncharted territory for us, so that's the only reason I would put the brakes on that.
Thank you for clarifying, and I guess I would just ask, what might you need from the BCLT to support that? Is it a new letter, a new application? Are the minutes of this meeting sufficient? And then would we go through another public hearing, public comment process, or like, what does that look like? Because
I think we could.
this has been pretty
Board
exhaustive.
approves it could be approved contingent on that clarification. That you were asking to transfer one water meter over to another property. And in the future would be eligible for asking to transfer that water meter back.
Okay, that works. That works.
So,
Happy
I
to
mean,
support
if
that.
This board were to approve tonight.
Yep.
It could be contingent on that clarification. That you would be allowed to do that.
I'm going to follow on to emeritus members of the board.
I'm gonna just ask,
Provide
it sounds to me like what you prefer is stacking and unstacking. And unstacking, I can't for the life of me think why it's a problem, but I also agree you shouldn't make that decision. It certainly doesn't have any moratorium impact, just to separate the meters back. So if stacking and unstacking actually makes more sense, which is what it sounds like to me, then it seems to me that rather than messing around with these transfers back, that you ask for the stacking, in the next week, you decide, okay, we haven't thought this through enough, or the board hasn't thought it through enough. And you guys are gonna need to revisit this, that you need to schedule another meeting. But it sounds to me like you've gone off track here. And that what you really want is stacking, and unstacking. And I suspect that there's no fundamental, I can't think off that line of why there's a fundamental problem with stacking. But I agree that you shouldn't make that decision. So I'm gonna suggest that you go with your plan A, which is stacking. But don't do anything, and you can't do anything about it yet anyway. You don't own that property, like, the board can't stack it for you anyway. Yes. And, so you can have this be under consideration as well. You know, in the meantime, whether that's a problem, unstacking here. It just sounds to me like that's closer to what you want. And you were just trying to figure out another alternative, and I suspect that they unstacking.
But it would be contingent on that clarification.
Yeah,
It's not.
that's right. You're
We're
not making-
saying the same
you're not
thing,
making that
whether
decision.
it's swapping or stacking.
Yeah.
I think it would be contingent on the clarification. I appreciate though the point that you're making, Lyndon, because I think that the stacking gives us the highest chance of success out the gate to ensure that as we're migrating to a new status quo, we have the highest chance of success in staying within. So that would be the preferred way to start. We were looking to increase, a margin for that transitional period. It is just and we are happy if it means that we would lose the meter forever, would take that risk if it was the only way. But it is also, we all know the value of a water meter. It's not something to give away lightly. So I think clarifying and maybe following the recommendation to stack and unstack, if that's possible, would be choice one. Choice two would be the swapping, and maybe, you can make the ruling conditional on that depending on what you decide. But the stacking is contingent on a swap anyway. So it's just kind of done. Sorry, yes, sorry. So and swapping from one. Yes. Yes, so that's. Is anyone on the board prepared to present a motion?
Can I just say one thing more about that?
One.
Is that, once, the permanent housing is underway, the land trust owns those properties. That could be merged, so it's one piece of property, so now you get 2 meters on one property, so the whole idea of unstacking or unswapping is moved, it goes away.
Unless they wanted to move that water.
Pay for the project. Well, right, so that, there's precedent for that. There's cases where there's been more than 1 meter on a piece of property, and the second meter hasn't been used and it's been sold. Water goes. Yeah.
Board members.
We are going to, we have yet another item on our agenda after this one.
It's just a report.
I know, so it won't be long. That is. Is anyone, Kevin, when you spoke to, making these one at a time, or you're going to?
I am. So, there may be time for even more discussion though, once the motion is made, is that true? I'm not sure I have all my questions answered, I hope so, but I'm just going to find out. But I'm happy to make a motion now. I'm gonna make a motion to grant a limited water use permit for 130 Mesa Road at 2,700 cubic feet.
Just a second.
Any discussion, more discussion?
Give me a second. Am I doing with it maximum allowed under resolution, correct?
Yeah, I'm just going back to my memo to see, but I believe that's right.
So the gentleman on the far my right, when he speaks, I can't understand him at all. He's not coming, yes, I could.
Yes.
I don't have any more questions. So the motion is on the table.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Number 2, 160.
I just want to say, if everyone can hear me, I spend most of my day reading and researching and triple checking the numbers and thankfully, these two emeritus board members came in and answered a lot of questions and clarified a lot of items, so didn't have to do as much talking. But for me, it's really important to see, like, I'm looking at this in a very kind of maybe cold and objective manner of like, this is the toolbox that we're able to use with the moratorium and its resolutions. But there's been so many impassioned speeches and viewpoints on the subject. And I think where everyone's coming from is that they love this place and they're afraid of losing it or losing some part of it. And I just wanted to say that while I know that's kind of like a more emotional sentiment, I feel that those concerns are valid and that there are entities and areas that those will be kind of taken care of. But I feel that as a board member making a more objective, kind of pragmatic decision that these things are safe and accounted for. And the tools that we have to use, which as these two gentlemen said, are pretty limited. So it's very complex and our water supply is incredibly fragile and delicate. And we can't assure that you have water, which is kind of crazy, but I feel that the resolution and the tools and the discussions that we've had with our council and then just listening tonight is very rooted in like solutions that are well documented and have been formed over the years. So that's kind of my like take a deep breath. We have been thinking about this sentiment, and I hope that what's happening in our town right now with this project and with some of the other things happening in the civic group are kind of a new inertia to look at our town and really start to think about what we can do to move forward as one community, which some people have said so nicely. And some people who were here a long time ago in the town of Say itself have said to me that this feels similar to that time where there's a little bit more energy, there's a little bit more passion, there's a little bit more work being done to make some changes. And I hope that this can be, this is starting to be at a time where we are talking to each other again. And the BCPUD is maybe what a lot of you older folks once knew it to be, where you could come and talk respectfully and peacefully and be heard, and have someone listen. And I think that's all we can ask, but I just wanted to say that because it's important to me to acknowledge these things are happening in this town when what we're doing here is kind of like boring. You know, we're looking at numbers and we have very limited tools to make these decisions. So, thanks for that.
Is anybody prepared to make a motion?
Yeah.
Please.
I propose a motion to the board to approve a limited water use permit for 160 Maze Road. That the maximum amount requested. 18,000.
Yeah.
That's my motion.
Could we make it obviously contingent on the issuance of the building?
Contingent on ownership by BCLT. Condition of a temporary building permit for this project that's been presented tonight. Two conditions, any other condition?
Affordable
Well-
housing.
I don't think that has, that's not really all right, that's.
And so when I was saying swap earlier, I meant I was making the transfer. That would be the other. Transfer 1/6 over to 1/3. For the temporary.
For this, look at the back.
That's.
Could you please speak up? Thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
there's a motion on the table. To approve a limited water use permit for 160 Mason Road. At the maximum amount permitted by BCPUD resolutions and requested by BCLT at 18,233 cubic feet per quarter. With two conditions, one being BCLT owns this property. And two. What's the second condition? There's a temporary building permit granted for this,
There's no such thing as a temporary building.
sorry, you're
Building.
You're right, sorry. So, I didn't mean to say
A
that.
building permit for the temporary emergency housing.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, building permit for the temporary emergency housing project.
Yes.
Right.
Jennifer?
You need to also make findings that there's been documentation that the allocation available under A or B would be a hardship or reduction of services, like in order to grant the additional amount.
As Andy said, it's sort of subjective, but how do you determine what hardship is, what water each person uses? But I think we're trying to get this project built, so providing them the buffer is.
I feel that there's a precedent for approximately 25 gallons per day per person to be adequate. And the current usage is about that. The proposed motion also, the 18,233 cubic feet per quarter is less than recent quarters have been. So as an average, I feel that this is an appropriate amount, but it also demonstrates a number, a target that is in line with what does work. And so I would propose that we start with something that works instead of trying to be aspirational or perhaps more aspirational. And so that's how I would justify that using less could be a hardship. And it doesn't seem necessary to me because we are limiting the use. Does that make sense to you?
Do we have a second?
I'll second. Right.
Any discussion?
Another hearing, I'll call the question, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Right, moving on to the third piece of this. Beautiful item. This juicy, rich item, which is the stacking. And we've had a fair amount of discussion about stacking and transferring and this and that. Stacking is what's on the agenda. That's what I actually, and I'm wondering if anybody.
Can I interrupt? I'm sorry. It's getting late. Leave the chairs up. The volunteers can take down anymore. Okay. But as long as the doors are your way up, I'll take the chair.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, everybody, I think we should stack the chair. Okay, we are moving on to the stacking. I am ready to entertain a motion. If anyone wishes to put one forward related to the stacking with the various contingencies.
that we will. eliminate.
I'm happy to make a motion, but I know I'm getting very tired, so I'm not being particularly articulate. But I think we could make a motion to approve the stacking of meters contingent on that they
Ownership.
could unstack in the future.
Well, no, that's to be determined later.
Right, that's what I'm saying, we could approve it contingent.
I think the request would be contingent upon BCLT ownership.
Yes.
So you have the same owner. You could certainly make it contingent upon the same conditions you did for 160. So the issuance of the building permit for the temporary emergency housing. And it would be the request of the BCLT that we make it contingent upon your legal counsel reviewing that we would retain the right to unstack in the future.
And contingent upon affordable housing, which is the
And
basis.
contingent upon affordable
I
housing.
think that's a good, that's a good.
That it is, I'm saying it out loud.
Yeah,
I don't know, do you think legal counsel will be able to determine if we can unstack, saying that's uncharted territory? Will he be able to determine that?
That was the question.
Or do you want to make that a condition of the stacking that you can unstack? That-
I just, yeah, Jeff, please leave. Okay, I support that.
Okay,
Thank you.
you repeat the motion on the table, sorry. Jennifer, were you writing that down?
Yeah. And I do think that Dawn made a good point in terms of if the properties are merged, it's all mixed. So so that is a great point. In terms of any concerns out there, that can solved by that is correct. Yeah, so the motion is, you want me to, you're wanting me to read it back? Moving to approve the request to stack that, two previously approved allocations at 130 Mesa Road contingent on BCLT ownership of both properties, issuance of a building permit for the temporary emergency RV trailer park, that for the affordable housing purpose, and that legal counsel confirmation of the, if necessary, the ability to unstack, which I think would just be transferring a transfer over to the other property if it remains separate. But
You need the affordable housing condition in there, since that's baked into the resolution, allowing the stack, right?
Yeah, the affordable housing is part of the building permit, I believe. So I think yes.
It's part of the stack.
As it says in the resolution, stacked water meters can only be used, so, like we talked about earlier.
oh, I see.
So I don't think we need that in the condition, that's.
Right.
Yeah, it's baked.
Sort of baked in.
So deed restriction would not be conditional? Recording deed restriction.
I think Annie spoke to that earlier.
We can't record the deed. I mean, I'm happy for you to, if it satisfies, I'm happy for you to add a contingency upon the. Well, no, actually, I don't know how we would do that.
Two properties. It's consistent with what possible.
So, okay, I will just say that we have a temporary project, temporary emergency housing project for which we have a building permit and would be constructing. I would believe that we would need something that we would be tying to for the permanent housing, which those plans don't exist yet. And I'm sorry, all my lawyers are gone. So I don't know what to do about that, but
You were happy about having.
of course we are. But does anyone here, Andrew? Sorry to put you on the spot. Do you know, given your role in construction, if we would be able to deed restrict and commit to that for something which is not yet built?
I think it's more of a legal question, but I'm guessing you would need some sort of certificate. occupancy or limitation to impact.
That's how we usually do it now. So that's what I'm familiar with. So that takes me back to my point that if we haven't built the permanent housing, I don't know what we're deed restricting. Do you have other knowledge?
Completely empty piece of property. And deed restriction, you're creating a system that you don't have to actually have building on property. in order to have the deed restriction.
Okay, thank you for correcting me. I noted the eye roll, and all I will say is that please give me some grace for the fact that I am not the expert in this area. My experts left because it's, yeah,
Language for this, please.
thank you.
Why don't we have a condition that it would use whatever legal mechanism is appropriate to require affordable housing, so we don't box ourselves into a specific instrument?
Well, there's a reason for that specific
I
instrument.
understand
and
that
the reason
restriction is appropriate.
The reason is that the use of the property can be changed much more easily in the future. If there's a recorded deed restriction.
I know that, but there's two different mechanisms in play. And there may be, I think what Annie is concerned about is that there could be language that is too narrow at this stage that could run afoul of the permitting process of the county. And so I think the intent is there to be as restrictive as possible, but to confer with the county to ensure that there's no, that nothing impedes the permitting process, right? So you're asking for a deed restriction on the property, sale of the property. And then she's referencing restrictions when it comes to the building itself. Right.
Can I jump into this here, because what you're discussing here is actually a BCPUD board there, not something. The BCLT has made a request for this stack. The stacking requirements that the board has already set for itself include the affordable housing restriction. You're trying to tell the board here how they have to enforce their own affordable housing. It's not actually a question for her. Her question is whether she wants the stacking. And she's saying she does want the stacking, you know, subject to a couple of conditions. Then it's up to the board to say, for us to enforce our affordable housing restriction, this is what we insist on. So I think you're trying to tell the board here how it has to do its job to enforce its own restrictions of affordable housing required for the stacking. And I actually think that you should leave that to the board to decide for itself how it is going to enforce its restrictions. The obvious answer is the restriction.
Well, obviously, the board can decide whatever it wants. It can require them to simply, I don't know, write it out.
I'm just saying, we don't have to decide. I'm just saying that
Whether or not that would be a restriction, that would.
it's not for the purpose. It's not a condition. It's what the board already said. It's already baked in. The board's own action here is under its own authority that it created for itself under 655, or 761, whichever resolution is under, where it said it has to be affordable housing. Honestly, it also says that to be the same owner, which for the, you know, for the purposes of the meeting, saying it has to be the same. But it's already baked in. You already answered your question for yourself. And you can decide for yourself how you're enforcing that. So I don't think this discussion about the deed restriction is actually germane for this moment.
So I'm just going to jump in. I know that I've been shut down several times and I was told that no questions, but I see that there's a robust conversation happening here. And it seems to me that this board is voting on this based on certain representations being made. And we're asking, there's a conversation happening where people who are in the audience are wanting those representations to be enforceable. One of the ways to do that is with a deed restriction. And one of the ways that the board can make it enforceable is with a deed restriction. And deed restrictions are very often done in real estate transactions. Now that I obviously don't know the the scope of this board's authority to do that sort of thing, or its track record or precedent in that, but there is a desire to hold BCLT accountable.
BCLT would like to be held accountable, and I would like to suggest that we adopt the language that Layla proposed unless there is an objection from the board members who are left in the room. Jeff, Howard, any objection to Layla's proposal? Okay, then I think that's how we would like to be held accountable.
Can that be recited? Because I couldn't hear Layla when she was speaking.
I did not know. Yeah, that I forgot.
Maybe
you want to go to the microphone? We're letting you go.
My suggestion is to make binding language, to offer. What are we doing? Are we doing the resolution? What are we even doing right now? We're doing the. My suggestion is to incorporate a contingency that the intent is to have a fully binding restriction in whatever manner is consistent with the development process. So whether it's a deed restriction or a restriction on the agreements you have with tenants, just to make a general intent as part of state a general intent to restrict. I mean, as you said, Lyndon, it's baked into the process. I completely agree with you.
So let the board do its job. That's already the authority is doing it.
So just restate that intent and the binding.
You don't even need to restate it. It's under the resolution that you're doing this under. You're just trying to tell the board here, we're gonna tell you how to do your job. And I don't think that this particular moment is the moment.
But I would just offer, I mean, I think the dialogue is about good faith and about having it on the record that the desire and the intent of the land trust is to be held through a binding instrument to this commitment to affordable housing.
And the board is still in the position to do that. The board is totally in the position to say, in order to enforce this, we're going to approve this subject to our conditions under 655 or 755, whatever the hell the resolution number is. And the board is going to come back and say, we want X, Y, and Z under our resolution. And one of those things is now it's going to be enforced that it's affordable housing. The obvious answer is deed restriction. But why do we have to sit here as the audience telling the board, this is how you guys need to do your job to follow that resolution? I'm not convinced that our audience here needs to be telling you guys that you need to spell this out right now, how you're going to do your job. I think you just sit down and say, okay, we've got this resolution that we're going to be operating under. It says it has to be affordable housing. How are we going to enforce it? We probably end up deciding it's a deed restriction. But I don't know why we have to put that into your motion right now of the audience trying to dictate to you. I think the audience is looking for reassurance that this property is sold in 50 years, that it doesn't become something else. Yeah, we'll be back with the audience.
Yeah, I think it's a legitimate concern. Thank you for sitting up for us.
I would like to put that motion to the table. Perhaps we could restate it one more time in the next slide. Sorry, Jennifer has a. The question is whether.
Right, first me. Okay, sorry, it's Kirsten moved to stack the allocations that have just been determined pursuant to the prior limited water use permit decisions for 130 and 160 on 130, contingent on the BCLT ownership of both properties, the building permit issuance for the temporary emergency housing, confirmation of the ability to, if needed, unstack or transfer, because if the properties are merged, it's moved, right, so if needed. And then I didn't know whether there's a decision on any additional conditions.
No, it's just 671.
I'd like to call the question. All in favor?
We can. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'll second.
Didn't mean to pick on the spot, I just like it. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Muchas gracias para esto. Esto es el permiso que necesitamos para mover adelante con este proyecto. Muchísimas gracias.
One moment before everybody leaves, I would really like to thank all the people who came out on the screen and in the room. This is exactly what we need. And I really appreciate the muddle, and I appreciate the different emotions and all the thoughts that went into it. And I thank you. It's great to see all of you. I see people I haven't seen in years. And I really want to give a special thanks to people who translated for us out of the kindness of their hearts after a long.
And I also want to say, I look forward to a day when we don't rely on volunteers to do the translation, but thank you for volunteering. You should be paid for this, and we thank you.
Yes, and if everybody wants to see us leaving now before our final and fascinating item, would like to stack it quickly on the way out, we would appreciate that.
Good, how are you? Good. Yes. So tired. Yeah, no kidding. Bye.
One more item, we haven't adjourned the meeting.
I know. Better on the other.
That was hard, up to you. Well, no, I think now.
Yeah.
Hey, Grace, you might just do the final item and then. Yeah. And David, I'm sorry, just this is gonna take one plus one.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, quietly.
Moving on to item 6.
Thank you.
BCPUD sewer system management plan update, updated spill emergency response plan.
Yeah, so what I'm doing is giving the, advising the board that what staff's in the process of doing is, ensuring that the district is gonna be in compliance with a new order from the State Water Board that takes effect at 1 second after midnight on June 5th.
And part of that requirement, there's numerous other requirements that we've already satisfied to register me as a legally responsible official, and we're going to be updating our sewer, or putting our sewer system management plan, the state water board website, and then we also are updating what was formerly called our overflow emergency response plan to now be a spill emergency response plan. And, but it's more than that, a lot, and to comply with all the new elements in the new order. And so we will, I'm advising you that we're working on that and we'll meet that deadline. And it'll be live at 12 midnight and 1 second on June 5th. So just wanted to report that.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you for all the work that you put into
Yeah.
that. You know,
Big undertaking.
just.
Big undertaking.
Yeah. Bigger, yeah.
8 pages to 83 pages.
Yeah. I'm trying to give us the Mark Twain plan, you know, just take your time and make it short and succinct, and then that's a long process. So if I had more time, I'd write a shorter plan.
All right, do I have a motion to adjourn? Yes, I make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The audience can come and do all night.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, board, the new members and the existing board.